Good evening. It is 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, March 16, 2022. And this regular meeting of the Sandpoint City Council is now called to order in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street in Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I am Mayor Shelby Ronstadt presiding. Also present are councilors Kate McAllister, Deb Rule, Joel Espiro, and Andy Grote, Jason Welker, and Justin Dick. We'll now rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone. Before we begin, there's been a request from staff to remove a portion of item 5B, the public hearing on zoning code update for proposed amendments to Title IX, Chapter 2. This is not the public hearing for Sand Creek setback from the agenda. I will yield the floor to Infrastructure and Development Services Manager Amanda Wilson for an explanation. For good faith explanation is required in order to amend the agenda after the meeting has begun.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, city staff are recommending that we remove a portion of item 5B. 5B is a three-part request for an amendment to Title IX, which is our zoning ordinance. The portion that we are requesting to be removed specifically is Chapter 2, Section 1-3 regarding commercial C use limitations. As a result of comments that we received today, city staff would really appreciate some more time to do our due diligence regarding those comments and make a determination if we need to bring this matter back before the Planning and Zoning Commission, or if we need to bring it back forward for a public hearing to City Council.
With that, I would entertain a motion. Item 5B, public hearing on zoning code update for proposed amendments to Title IX, Chapters 1, 2, and 4, based on the good faith explanation that has been provided by staff. Is there a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt before you make your motion. We would like to proceed with item 5B, just for clarity. We would only like to remove that portion of Chapter 2.
Okay.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor Spurrow,
Yes.
Counselor Grote,
Yes.
Counselor Welker,
Yes.
Counselor Dick.
Yes.
Motion passes. All right. So again, welcome everyone. Before we proceed, I'd like to ask those of us on the dais to ensure that we are leaning forward and speaking clearly and directly into our microphone so that those attending on Zoom and in the overflow areas outside are able to hear us. If the sound isn't as good out in the foyer out there. Also, for those present here in the chambers and in our overflow areas with the number of in attendance this evening, we'll need to make sure that we are being considerate of those around us by keeping conversations and noise to a minimum to ensure everyone can hear. Please note, as reflected on the agenda, we're deviating from our usual order of business tonight. For those who may be in attendance for the public hearings that are scheduled for this meeting, those public hearings will begin no earlier than 6:30. Following the public hearings, we will have a couple of annual proclamations. Then we will allow for general public forum and take up the consent calendar. Again, the public hearings will begin at or after 6:30. But first, we have some special guests with us this evening and a couple of very exciting announcements. At this time, I'll yield the floor to City Administrator Jennifer Stapleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just share my screen. Thank you, Mayor and Council and members of the public. I'm really pleased tonight to make an exciting announcement and to present agreement for consideration and hopefully approval of the City Council for construction of a facility in our, as identified in our 2020 Parks and Recreation Master Plan. As the council and the public will recall, we went through approximately 2-year master planning process for all of our parks and recreation facilities, our programs, our assets. And ultimately, this culminated in the adoption of a comprehensive Parks and Recreation Master Plan in mid-June 2020. As identified in that plan, there are a number of phased implementation park improvements that were identified in 4 different parks concepts, including a concept for Traverse Centennial Great Northern Sports Complex. At the time that we had adopted the plan, there was, and throughout the process of even developing the plan, there was much discussion at the time that we're doing this plan for our parks and recreation, and we don't necessarily have the funding to be able to implement, especially the capital components of the parks concepts. And when we were going through and did our community surveys and public input in our parks and rec planning process, we asked the public, how should we go about funding some of these improvements? And the #1 response that we heard back from the public by far was when possible through public and private partnerships. So I'm happy to present one of those to you tonight. Our Traverse Centennial Great Northern concept identifies improvements at all 3 parks, identified collectively as the sports complex. For this particular fiscal year, we had identified a project and council had approved budget for improvements at the skate park that lies up here in the southeastern portion of the park. And those were improvements to an all-wheeled facility and adding additional features. Last year, council will recall that we replaced the kidney bowl, but with this additional funding, it's for a broader concept for the skate park. In addition to that, just adjacent to that, there were a number of projects that were identified as phased projects for our court sports. Specifically, in this concept, it was for tennis and pickleball. So I want to move forward to the story that we're here for tonight. And hopefully I do justice to this wonderful family that we've been working with over the last 2 years. In July of 2020, so just before we had adopted our Parks and Recreation Master Plan, one afternoon in July, a wonderful gentleman, Jim Russell, and his mother, Jenny Russell, came into City Hall and had requested a meeting with me to discuss making a legacy donation. At the time that we had that meeting, I had no idea if we were talking about a bench, which many people donate to our parks and along our walkways, or what the size of the donation was, or the interest, or who the donation was for. We had a wonderful conversation that July afternoon about, actually we were in 2019, excuse me, not 2020, July of 2019. And we had a wonderful conversation about Jenny's husband, Jim Russell, who was born here in Sandpoint on March 23rd of 1933 to Alex and May Russell. And he was one of 6 children that grew up here in the Sandpoint area. He played multiple sports and had a lifelong love for sports, athletes, and exercise in general. He played multiple sports at Sandpoint High School. He graduated third in his class in 1951 and ultimately went on to pursue his education at the University of Idaho and is now recognized as a member of the Engineering Hall of Fame at the University of Idaho. He met his wife, Jenny, his wife of 63 years, at Odin Hall. So they have many ties, and we had wonderful conversations today about Odin Hall and the many events that they've had there over the years. Not only from their first meeting, but reunions and other events at Odin Hall. And he met Jenny when he was attending University of Idaho, and Jenny was still in high school here at Sandpoint High School. We talked about what Jim was interested in, because anytime you're talking with somebody looking at making a legacy donation, you want to understand what really was that person, their loved one, what was their interest, what were they about? And we talked about Jim's lifelong love of fishing, golf, and tennis. And so we were looking for alignment for a legacy donation. And I said, well, we're in the process of doing a Parks and Recreation Master Plan update. And so let me pull out some of the concepts and I can show you what we have, particularly because of his interest in tennis and court sports. We pulled the concept for Traverse Park and looked at the various options that we had there at that site related to the court sports. If you go back and look at our Traverse Court or Traverse Park Sports Complex, there are 4 options that are identified for our court sports there. One is to resurface, replace our 4 existing outdoor tennis courts. And those sit directly adjacent to our skate park. The second was to add 4 additional relocated outdoor courts. And we've had a lot of public comment and have talked about that at council meetings since the adoption of this master plan, that since that time, we have heard from members of the tennis community that they really enjoy their tennis courts dispersed at the different parks. And so perhaps relocating and having all of our courts at a single park is not a preferred option moving forward. Our third option was to add an additional outdoor pickleball court, and that was identified. So that basically is the equivalent of 4 tennis courts is 16 pickleball courts, excuse me. And then finally, kind of a long-term vision that was identified in the concept, but never really fully vetted out because of the amount of dollars that would be associated with that concept, was enclosing 4 existing tennis courts, those 4 courts that are directly adjacent to the skate park. We have met, I have personally met with Jim and Jenny when they've been in town on multiple occasions over the last couple of years. Many of their family members are here tonight. They are here at least a couple of times a year, every year, and spend as much time as possible here in the Sandpoint area. And so when they were in town, I would generally get a call from Jim and Jenny, and we would talk again about where we are with our master planning concepts, where is council support for the master plan, and really trying to align their vision and interests and donation that would honor the great legacy of Jim Russell. Late this year, it was in about November after Maeve came on board as our Parks Planning and Development Manager. I handed this project to her shortly after Thanksgiving when Jim and Jenny and I had met again and said, Maeve, could you go through, and this was at Jim and Jenny's request, and really vet all of these concepts and get some pricing associated with them, current pricing. So that they can consider really what it is that they're interested in doing. And Maeve went through that whole exercise. We again brought Dell up, who's assisted us with our parks concepts, Del Hatch, and kind of revisited those, revetted the concepts, and ultimately looked at what design and construction costs would be for all of these 4 options. We put together a presentation for Jim and Jenny highlighting those 4 different options, hoping that we would have an alignment on one of those for the public. And we actually had added a 5th in here. And that was if we were to look at the 4 existing outdoor courts, a 5th option could be to at least get a cover over of those, because one of the conversations that we've had over the years has been, and we've heard from the public, is that our outdoor facilities are great, but in the wintertime, we lack facilities that people can use year round, especially. And so we looked at that option and presented that to Jim and Jenny as well. After I would say a very short conversation that we had presenting these concepts shortly after Christmas this year, Jim and Jenny got back to us immediately and said, one of these concepts resonated with them. And in fact, they told us a story about how Jim, when he would come here every summer, would sit and have his coffee and sketch out on a napkin what it is that he really thought Sandpoint needed. And again, he's an engineer, so he would have his concepts that he's working through. And they said one of these concepts really resonated, and they saw their dad's dream come true. And for Jenny, her husband, that concept was that 4th envisioned concept in our Parks and Rec master plan for Traverse Park, which is a fully enclosed court facility. As Dell and Maeve went back through and revetted this with pricing, looked at other facilities and refined the concept, we looked at really converting what right now is only 4 tennis courts into a multi-purpose court building that could accommodate 4 new tennis courts that could also be converted and used as 16 pickleball courts, and would also accommodate basketball within the facility as well. And both Jim and Jenny had many stories to share too about Jim's love of basketball and playing, so we had alignment there as well. The building is presented to Jim and Jenny would include fully lit, heating, cooled for year-round use, restrooms, looking at locker room facility, additional multi-use community space like a community room, storage areas where we could have seating for tournaments and things in the facility, entry welcome desk, and other amenities. Our total price verification on this for full design and construction of this facility, not just the building itself, but also a plaza gateway that would be an entryway into our overall sports complex, so into Traverse, Centennial, and Great Northern. Our estimated cost for construction of the gateway in the facility was $7.5 million. We were hoping that Maeve and I went into this conversation with Jim and Jenny. I just have to tell you personally, hoping if we can even get a roof over the courts, this will be a huge win for us. And this would be such a large donation and such a wonderful gift to this community. And Jim and Jenny immediately said back to us, we love this. There's the alignment with the dream, and we are prepared to make a donation to the city of Sandpoint of $7.5 million for construction of this facility to begin immediately.
They're clapping.
Mhm.
They're standing up.
Maeve has done a rendering of this so that Jim and Jenny would have a concept to think about, and the community would have a concept as well. But we want to be really careful in representing this as an artistic conceptual rendering only, and Maeve is an artist and did a beautiful watercolor for Jim and Jenny in honor of this donation as well. But what we are asking for council to consider is a donation agreement with Jim and Virginia Jenny Russell for final design and construction of the James E. Russell Sports Center. And later on the agenda tonight, we have included approval for an RFP to go out for design build. And so with that, through a design build process, that will finalize what all can be included, what this facility exactly will look like. This is only a rendering at this point. But Maeve is excellent, and we brought her on with the background to really look at how it would fit within site. She has that background in landscape architecture, so we're probably not too far off with this. You've seen the interior concepts. Both Maeve and Jason for the past couple of months have been going to area facilities, Peak Fitness. We have heard loudly from our court community, our tennis players, our pickleball players, that they are traveling down to Peak Fitness in order to play in the wintertime. We've been down there, we've looked at it, we've looked at scheduling, we've looked at the hub facility in Spokane, we've looked at a number of other facilities. And Jason has already started kind of laying out what a recreation programming structure could look like, that we could optimize the facility. Maeve's put together the rendering and has also developed an RFP for design build that we'll be asking council later on in the agenda to approve us issuing in the next week. Our estimated timeline on construction of this facility, fully constructed out, as well as the gateway, is our goal is to be done in October of 2023. We are holding ourselves to a timeline, and our agreement with the Russells would hold us to a timeline of 24 months from the time the donation transfers over to the city. A final note, one thing I would say to the council and to the community, I've been working with Andy and Sarah on this for the last couple of months, putting together the donation agreement, looking at the transfer to the city and how we would set up the reserve with the donation. And I can tell you, we have not found a cash donation to a local jurisdiction this large anywhere in the state of Idaho. And we really haven't found it anywhere across the country in all of our research. So the significance of this donation for our community, I don't think can be understated whatsoever. And with that, I would like to ask Jim Russell to come up and make a few comments to the council as well.
I'll do my best. On behalf of my mom, myself, and my father, I want to thank Mayor, council members, Jennifer, Maeve, and all the other administrators that are here for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to read this because there's no way I could do it any other way, and I might not be able to get through it this way. I want to welcome and thank our many family members and local friends that are here tonight for this announcement. Some of my father's and my mother's brothers, sisters, in-laws, nieces, nephews are here, and most live locally. I know them as uncles, aunts, and cousins. Welcome and thank you for being here. It means a lot to Mom, to me, and to Dad. There are several other family members that could not attend, and yet others that may be watching this from afar with my dad. We welcome all of them also. My father was born and raised here in Sandpoint, went to high school here, met and married my mom here, got his EE degree from University of Idaho, and recently was inducted into the Engineering Hall of Fame there, which you heard about. We returned to Idaho nearly every year for vacations. And in the later years, he and Mom came back here nearly once a month during the warmer months. My dad played sports most of his life. He played basketball and football at Sandpoint High. He continued to play basketball for many years. He played American Legion baseball, fast pitch and slow pitch softball. He was avid about exercising every day, no matter where he was, jogging every day, calisthenics every day, tennis when he was in proximity of a tennis court. He played golf and tennis for as long as I can remember. He and I would play golf on many, many weekends, almost every weekend for as long as I could until my back gave out. Mom and Dad played tennis together for as long as she could before her back gave out. My dad firmly believed that lessons learned in sports carried over to all aspects of life. Competitiveness, sportsmanship, hard work, perseverance, tenacity, integrity, humility, camaraderie, accomplishment, and yes, sometimes defeat. All of these carried over into his personal and professional lives and were passed down to me and others over his life through sports or just through daily interactions with him. I know for a fact that some of my dad's longest and most cherished personal and professional friendships were forged on tennis courts. I do not know the exact date when my father first mentioned he wanted to build a sports center in Sandpoint, but I do know that it was more than 15 or 20 years ago. It was a dream of his for a long time. He wanted to give back something to Sandpoint, to Bonner County, and to Idaho. And he believed there is deeper value to the community such a sports center could provide long-term. Unfortunately, he could not make it happen while he was still alive. Mom and I knew we wanted to do something in his honor, but we're really unsure exactly what. We knew sports related, but beyond that, we were unsure what was possible. I first reached out to Jennifer in email in August or November of 2019, just a few months after my father passed away, and Mom and I began exploring many options. Initially, those discussions were pretty infrequent and the ideas were pretty amorphous. The pace picked up over time as we narrowed down the options, and during a teleconference call this past December 30th with Jennifer, Maeve, Mom, and I, we settled on the project and the donation amount. We have been ironing out the details ever since, and that brings us here today. Mom and I cannot think of a better way to use this money other than to donate it to the city, to be used to construct an indoor sports center dedicated in his honor. We wish it to be named in his honor, but not as a memorial or a monument. It is our hope that upon completion, the community of Sandpoint, Bonner County, and even the state of Idaho can benefit from a sports center open all year, where life lessons can be learned and where lifelong friendships can be forged for generations. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor and Council, the item before you tonight is requesting approval of a resolution to accept this donation and enter into a donation agreement between the city of Sandpoint and James A. and Virginia Jenny Russell for final design and construction of the James E. Russell Sports Center and adjacent Gateway Plaza.
Thank you. First, let me just say, Jim and Jenny, thank you so much on behalf of the city of Sandpoint, everyone here, the entire community, certainly everybody up here on the dais. Thank you for this unbelievably generous gift that will continue to give back to the community for decades to come. What an unbelievable example you set. And we are just all so grateful. So this is incredible. I also want to thank Jennifer and Maeve for all of your hard work in pulling this together and making this a possibility. And the rest of staff that contributed to this effort, thank you so much. And I would open up the floor to the council for any questions.
I don't have any questions. Just thank you so much. Like, you are an absolute, I'm gonna start getting a little misty. This is an absolute breath of fresh air. It comes as a complete surprise. I think that for all of us, to include the entire community, we're very thankful and very grateful. And it's so nice to have some great news. Thank you very, very much. Love you guys.
I just would like to say it's just overwhelming. And I thank you so much for this gift. And we will take care of it and use it wisely. And kids are gonna have a great time all year round.
Yeah.
As a father of four and coaching most of my life, I look forward to this. I know my children will benefit from it. And I look forward to seeing them grow in sports and how they can exemplify what your father preached to you guys. And we very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I just want to say, I will probably cry if I speak, but the children are so lucky to have members like you as part of our community.
Thank you. Thank you, counselors. With that, I will entertain a motion to approve the resolution accepting this donation and approving the agreement between the city of Sandpoint and James A. and Virginia Jenny Russell for final design and construction of the James E. Russell Sports Center and adjacent Gateway Plaza.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Absolutely.
Counselor Sparrow,
Yes.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Welker,
Yes.
Counselor Dick.
Yes.
Motion passes. The good news continues this evening, and I will again yield the floor to Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So one thing that many people who are not familiar with the Russell family and Jim Russell may not know is that Jim Russell's best friend in high school was Pat McManus. And many of you may be familiar with the many hilarious novels and then the subsequent theater productions based on the novels of Pat McManus. And for those who have read the Pat McManus stories, Jim is Reg Sweeney in those stories. And at the time that we were working with the Russell family, we had another local family come forward late last year, also wanting to make a donation to the community. And that is Ann Hargis and Denny Liggett, who are not physically in the room tonight, but you can see Ann and Denny on your screens. They are with us via Zoom. Ann and Denny have owned a home in the Sandpoint area for the last 40 years. And both Ann and Denny are retired veterinarians. And they came to us and were interested in donating a bronze sculpture to the community that would be a sculpture that children can interact with, that would be an animal because of their interests and background, but something that the community members could interact with. We had discussed, again, our concepts for our various parks, including the downtown waterfront. And as that project is taking a little bit longer to move through our conceptual phase, we also talked with them about this donation that the Russells were making here at Traverse Park. And we told them the story about the Russell family and the connection with Pat McManus and the novels. And so they were interested in contributing to the project here at Traverse Park and seeing some sculptures incorporated into the Gateway Plaza, not only for the community to interact and for them to make a gift in the memory of a family member and celebrating all of their work with animals over their careers, but also celebrating this wonderful gift to the community from the Russell family. And so they had been looking at some bronze sculptures by Georgia Gerber, a world-renowned artist from the Seattle area who has accessible public art at Pike Street Market for those who have been there and seen the bronze pig. And most of us who have children have been there and had your kids on the pig and gotten your pictures. That is one of Georgia's pieces of art. She also has another piece at the San Diego Zoo and some other very prominent areas where, again, children and the public can interact with the sculptures. They approached us with an interest in donating initially a sculpture of a mountain lion and her cub. You can see here on the right. And as we were talking about this location and this other donation and the plaza, and mentioning again the Pat McManus books, for those who are familiar with them, there's a couple of stories, one about a mountain lion and another one about a bear who gets into the attic. And so we're telling them these two stories, and Maeve and I had a conversation, and Anne and Denny got back to us the next day and said, we love these stories and we love the idea of this, and we have decided that we would like to donate 2 sculptures to go into this area. And again, honoring the Russell family and the Pat McManus stories. And so we found the sculpture that Georgia has done, and we are able to get it in time for when you're constructing this project of a mountain lion and her cub and a bear. And so we have made this wonderful connection, telling the Russells then about this story. These families have not had the opportunity to meet one another, and this is the first time they're seeing one another. But Maeve and I've kind of lived through this, telling the stories back and forth of the 2 different families. Maeve's incorporated in this Gateway Plaza. If you didn't catch it on the first time we were looking at the sports center, she's also incorporated the bear and the mountain lion actually into the environment, envisioning it at the Gateway Plaza. And so the second item before council tonight for consideration is a second donation agreement of a custom commissioned sculpture entitled Bear, and the other is Cougar and her cub, to be placed at this Gateway Plaza. After the design is complete, this donation includes the purchase of both of the sculptures, the shipping and placement of the site in accordance with the design. And so before you tonight is consideration of a donation agreement, making this donation to the public as well. And I'd like to open it up to Anne and Denny. If you want to make a comment before I hand it over to the mayor, I don't want you to feel like you're on the spot, but do want to give you the opportunity.
Well, thank you. I'll make it very, very brief. We just like to thank the city, and obviously the Russells, along with Jennifer and Maeve for facilitating this whole thing. We're so happy that we can add to this wonderful project. It's just amazing that it all came together the way it did. We want these sculptures to also memorialize our parents, because they gave us every opportunity we received and have been able to build upon. But that's pretty much it. I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and we look forward to seeing the finished project and hopefully meeting members of the Russell family as well one of these days. But thanks again.
That's it, Mr. Mayor.
I would also like to give a round of applause to Ann and Denny as well. Thank you both so much for your gift. These are really beautiful and, speak so eloquently to Sandpoint history and character and community. So what a fantastic addition to this other incredible gift. And we are so grateful as a community. Thank you so much. Does council have any questions or comments? Okay. I will entertain a motion to approve the resolution accepting this donation and approving the agreement between the city of Sandpoint and Hargis and Denny Liggett for 2 bronze sculptures for the Gateway Plaza at Traverse Park. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Welker,
Yes.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Spuro,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes,
Counselor McAllister.
Yes.
Motion passes. And finally, I will yield the floor to our Parks Planning and Development Manager, Maeve Nevins-Lavtar, for a presentation on the proposed RFP for Traverse Park renovations, Phase 1.
Thank you, Mayor. Bear with me while I pull up my screen. Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to present. We've been working really hard as a team, and not just myself. I want to thank my staff and my teammates at the city. Jason Wiley, particularly, he is our recreation superintendent. He's been my partner in developing the program and the recreation side, and helping me with the research, and of course, everyone else that I work with at the city. I do have Amanda Wilson with us tonight as well. She's been coaching me through the design build RFP process, which I'm about to articulate to you. So to give you a little bit of background on this project before I dive into the nitty gritty of the RFP, this project actually landed on my plate long before I had met the Russells. It was one of my first projects, and the task was to use the $95,000 that was allocated towards the skate park expansion and see what I could do with that funding. I think that's how Kim Woodruff at the time articulated it to me. And so I started in the fall. One of the first volunteer events I attended was the King of the Conch event, I believe is what they call it, the skateboard park event. And that was my first weekend in town. So I got to really meet a lot of the skaters and some of the little scooters and see all the different users. And then through that process, I had gone down the track of looking at this Traverse Park area, and it's on the screen right now. You can see the area that I started to look at and really scoping out, okay, well, what are all the other components to this project? And if I'm going to expand the skate park, which is currently 5,000 square feet, and I'm going to expand that area, and they're telling me they want lighting and they want coverage, and it's clear that they need lighting, because by the time I really wrapped my head around things, it started to get quite cold here and dark, and it was apparent that they needed lighting because the kids are out there turning on the lights, bringing their own lights from their own homes. So they're telling us without calling us, they're literally telling us by showing us that they needed these improvements. And so by observing and participating in community events, and then ultimately I did hire a action sports company to help facilitate the initial programming and conceptual design for the skate park expansion. We ended up having just one meeting with them, but it was enough to really grasp a good community assessment of what all the wheeled users would like to see out here. So then that was right around Christmas, and that was right around the same time that we understood the Russells, the depth of the donation and delicately maneuvering it because we wanted to be respectful of the process and not get the word out to anyone. I sort of re-navigated this, and with the help of Amanda, we have decided to request your permission to move forward with a solicitation for something called Design Build Request for Proposal. So here, this is a diagram of the master plan, and I've made the highlighted area with the orange bubble around it, the phase 1. And that's what we're going to focus on with this first part of the proposal, or first part of the contract. This right here is sort of a quick overview of the existing conditions on the site. Again, focusing on that bird's eye view with the orange. The item A is the existing courts, and you can see we have about 100-foot crack that goes down the center of the existing courts. So that right there off the bat, I knew that I needed to do a significant deferred maintenance project, and I was wondering, where am I going to get the money for this? And then the area with the D on it, that is the existing skate park right now, and it is about 5,000 square feet. All of that area that's encompassed in C to the south of the courts, that area is the 18,000 square feet that is identified in the park master plan for the potential build out of the skate park expansion. And then the dashed line B, that is the access from Pine Street. And after spending many, many days there myself walking, I have seen so many seniors and children cross right through that area, which is actually just a parking lot, and it's quite dangerous. And they end up landing right about where the entrance to the trailhead, or what we're calling the Gateway Plaza area, and that's in between the corner of the tennis courts and what I call B, item B. And what we have there currently is just a small obsolete sign. You can't really read the wayfinding and the map on it anymore. And there really isn't a designated plaza or a gateway or a trailhead. And then the lighting that we have is obsolete as well. It is not LED, it's not energy efficient. So we're looking at improving that. So those are just some of the existing conditions at the site. And through this design build process, we're hoping to make improvements. So what will be included in phase 1? Well, this is our wish list. I do believe with quiet confidence that we can achieve all of this. We are in our initial fundraising right now. Our total budget, I'll get into that in a minute here, but our total budget that we have with the donation from the Russells is around $7.8 million in hand. And as you all probably are aware, and if you're not, you should be, the skaters are actively fundraising right now, and they just had a huge event this past weekend. And I understand from Rory that they are several $1,000s higher than anticipated. So they are moving up every day with their donations. And we have several grants that we've been applying for and continue to look for, as well as I've engaged with the bike community and anticipate their participation as well. So given the breadth of the donations that we have and the money in hand, I believe that we can deliver the indoor multi-purpose court facility. We are aiming for this to be energy efficient, state of the art, also water efficient. We want this to be the most innovative state-of-the-art facility that has been built in the area, of course, but also just in the nation. We do want this to be a steel structure. We envision this to have a multi-use layout with the lines. And so that would enable us to have 4 tennis courts, but all those tennis courts could double, and they actually would turn into 16 pickleball courts, and then potential basketball. And who knows, we may have opportunities for volleyball and other court facilities as well. All of that programming, I've been working, like I said, hand in hand with Jason on the programming and the recreation, and how we would stagger the timing and how this would be most efficiently used with the community. Of course, it would have restrooms, a locker room facility, a multi-use community room, such as for birthday parties or, you know, the special wedding that you might have in a court facility. We would have indoor-outdoor connection because, as you know, everyone here loves to be outside, but when the weather permits, up. So we do envision that the walls would actually roll up, and we would be able to have interaction as well as sharing that space with the external plaza. And so we'd be able to have overflow seating and observation areas. We envision a gateway / plaza / trailhead. Now that seems like a lot to swallow, but with this type of design, we can accomplish quite a bit with the multifunctional design and separation of uses. Of course, the improved circulation from Pine Street and connecting to the existing trails will be part of this. Parking will come in a future phase, so we will be considering that. And we very well may realize the funding that we need in time to finish that full build out with the parking as identified in the master plan. And then, of course, the expanded skate park area. There's a lot of talk, like I said, about this action sports all-wheeled integrated facility. When I talk about all wheels, I'm imagining everything from people in wheelchairs to people with bikes, scooters, of course, the skate parks, inline skaters, and 2 years from now, maybe the hoverboards will be out there, definitely the one wheels. So we're imagining all of that. But of course, at the bottom of our heart, the skaters were the first user group there. So this will be designed with them, and it will be a very transparent community engagement process. The final thing that we're really looking at is the landscaping, integrating with the lighting and partial coverage where possible of all the different areas, and then a bike skills course. I am including the design of the 2 areas that are identified in the master plan. They are in black and white, but where my cursor is on the screen, just north of the existing tennis courts, is a little skills course. We are looking at that, as well as it was designated in the master plan BMX bike park facility. We're looking at that and maybe reinventing that terminology and thinking of it perhaps as a linear flow trail or something along those lines. All of this is very, very conceptual at this point. And once we have a contractor on board, the design portion will help lead the community and work with staff to finalize the concept. So you've already seen the beautiful concept, artistic interpretation. And again, this just comes from me, but it was scaled out and I did model the building. So it is accurate in size and scale. And I have worked with landscape architects and architects that we've worked on the master plan before. So I do feel confident in this concept. And of course, the artwork would be integrated as well from Ann and Denny. And again, thank you both so much for that. You did get to see a glimpse into this previously. And this is just a little bit of a glimpse, an idea of what it could look like with the integration. And while this park does not have an enclosed structure, you can see that they have a pool and they do have some courts off in the corner and they have basketball. So you can kind of get the idea of when we talk about integrated design. This one actually has a Velo Solutions brand pump track around the outside of their existing court or their existing skate park. So I have no idea what we're actually going to end up with in the end here, but we have kicked this process off. And finally, this is the timeline that we're looking at for this RFP. You can see we're hoping to issue this next week, and with the proposal closing on April 28th. And this is the tentative timeline. And as Jennifer mentioned, we're hoping to be 100% done with this phase 1, substantial completion by the fall of 2023. Oh, and one last thing, the funding. I did briefly mention it. We are currently sitting at 7.8 million. We are actively fundraising. We have about 300,000 for the skate park expansion. The target for that is around 500,000. Of course, every dollar counts. So we're continuing to look for funding with that, and you'll hear more as this project moves along. And with that, I'd like to turn over if you have any questions.
Great, thank you. Council, any questions?
Just a comment, I'd like to emphasize the recognition that Maeve gave to the Bonner County Skate Park Association. These guys formed a nonprofit about a year ago and have done some outstanding fundraising, solicited contributions from members of the community. They're hosting the bank slalom event up at Schweitzer, the skate competition. These guys are crushing it, and it's really cool that we talk about public-private partnerships. This is another great example of that. That little slice of the pie looks pretty small, but that was hard fought. And a lot of that came from the skaters. So good job to the skaters. Keep it up. You guys are going to get what you want. You're going to get what the community needs. So thanks a lot.
Well said. Yeah, go ahead.
And I wanted to just thank Maeve and make the comment that as a physical therapist, I really appreciate that you're looking at the other wheeled individuals that live in this town. We have numerous children who always are in wheels, and it will be great to see them have more opportunities to be integrated in the parks.
Thank you.
Yeah, especially in that location. And we're very fortunate to have you. What a thing to walk right into. I think that it's wonderful that we did a good job recruiting you and you did a good job with saying yes. So we look forward to more.
It's an honor.
All right, anyone else? Okay. I would entertain a motion to issue a request for proposals for Traverse Park renovations Phase 1 design build project. Is there a motion?
So moved. Oh, second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Welker,
Yes.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Sprow,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor McAllister.
Yes.
Motion passes. All right, with that, we will now take a short recess, after which time we'll proceed with this evening's public hearings, which will begin at 6:30 sharp. Thank you, everyone. Now for the fun stuff. Right, Amy? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for returning back. For those in the room, if you wish to speak, sorry. We're going to now begin with the public hearings this evening. And so here we go. For those of you in the room who wish to speak during either public hearing, and you haven't already filled out a form, they're available by the front door up there. Please take one of those, fill it out, and hand it to the clerk if you'd like to speak. For those attending by Zoom, you'll also have the opportunity to speak, and you will need to unmute your microphone when given that opportunity. So we have two public hearings this evening. First are the proposed amendments to Sandpoint City Code, Title IX, Chapter 2, which seek to replace existing Sand Creek setback regulations under City Code 9-2-1-4 with a new Section 10. City Planner Amy Tweeten will get us started with the presentation. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I will go through a brief presentation. Please feel free to ask. So again, this is an ordinance to Title IX and a little bit about what triggered the code amendment. The need for this code amendment was discovered during the preliminary design of the Farmers Landing project. That is a project that is included in the 2020 Parks and Recreation Master Plan, the downtown waterfront. And on the screen is the image of what is in the current master plan. So the plan itself incorporates public gathering places and use of stormwater best management practice structures to capture, treat, and solely release surface water to Sand Creek that would not be allowed under the current code language. So that's why the amendment is needed. A background on the drafting process of this ordinance. When the issue staff was aware of the issue, they took this to the Planning Commission first on September 7th, when there was a public hearing on the ordinance. The Planning and Zoning Commission at that time recommended some changes and postponed action to the 21st. Revisions to the ordinance were presented, and at that time, the commission recommended to council to not adopt the ordinance and to hold additional public workshops on the changes. A public workshop following that was held on October 7th. And then for several months after that initial public hearing, there were different stakeholder meetings held. And then on February 16th was the follow-up workshop to bring all council and commissioner members up to speed on what the current proposed language included or did not include. That was a workshop followed by council scheduling this public hearing. Where the code changes apply are on public and private property in the commercial A and B zones along Sand Creek, and those are indicated as the purple and orange areas on the zoning map. And a summary of what is included, the changes in the ordinance. The ordinance requires a permit before ground disturbance on any property adjacent to Sand Creek. It requires buildings within the defined waterfront setback to be reviewed for consistency with adopted planning documents. It requires a conditional use permit for functionally dependent water uses and structures within the 25-foot buffer. Buildings are not allowed in the 25-foot buffer. Compliance with Sandpoint stormwater ordinance and applicable federal and state permits. And as part of the conditional use permit process, evidence is required that any request meet the 9 conditional use permit criteria, including objectives of comprehensive plan and being in accordance with all applicable city codes. The ordinance also codifies that Sand Creek is a natural environmental feature of major importance. To emphasize the importance of its protection, it requires an effective vegetative buffer upland of the high water mark, and it adds a requirement that the city notify applicable federal and state agencies for any construction along Sand Creek and conditions related to best management practices and guidelines. And finally, it retains the 25-foot buffer for all buildings from the applicable high water mark. Now, as a zoning ordinance should be an implementation tool of your comprehensive plan, this amendment is consistent with several community planning documents, including many objectives of the comprehensive plan. That a long list of them were provided in the planning and zoning portion, the packet that you were provided. So just a brief summary of some of those. From the 2009 comprehensive plan, R1 is to provide integrated and comprehensive parks and recreation facilities to serve Sandpoint's needs. R3, incorporate environmentally sensitive areas and public open spaces in the parks and recreation system. E4, support downtown Sandpoint's historic role as a major economic, social, and civic center of Bonner County. And then natural resource HI, preserve and protect Sandpoint's natural resources. Another document, planning document, was the 2012-2013 Downtown Streets and Design Guide, which identifies Farman's Landing area as a desirable activity node. And that is an illustration pulled from that document. And then in the 2020 Parks and Recreation Master Plan, the plan is for continued and increased public access to the community shoreline, to look for opportunities for multi-purpose water access for all related activities, and protect environmentally sensitive areas and protect them by incorporating them into the Parks and Recreation system. Again, these are all planning documents from the last 10+ years. And this Farman's Landing project is an attempt to actually implement some of these goals and objectives. So again, in summary of the ordinance, the provisions do not allow buildings within 25 feet of the high water mark. It requires a vegetative buffer. It requires permits before any work commences along Sand Creek, and it provides for consistency and coordination with state and federal agencies. So before you tonight is the ordinance. Council has the option to adopt the ordinance, deny the ordinance, or postpone action on the ordinance with specific direction to staff of what changes would be needed.
Thank you, Amy. Any questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah, please.
I have a comment, and I've actually written something out because I've been involved with this for about 9 months now. So for those who don't know, before I served on city council, I was the chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I've been through this several times now. And I just wanted to share some thoughts that I have. So if you allow me a few minutes to read these, I prepared them ahead of time. So I'm going to read them now. The process of updating Sandpoint City Code Title IX, Chapter 2 began last July when the city staff informed the P&Z Commission that they were working on an amendment that would allow the city to fulfill the dual vision for Farmers Landing as a location for treatment of stormwater from the downtown commercial core and as a location for a public park with recreational amenities as described in the Parks Master Plan. The problem with current code, the commission was told, was that it prohibits construction of the kinds of structures envisioned in the Parks Plan, including an engineered stormwater treatment solution. Public entities, it turns out, are held to the same set of rules, as Fonda so eloquently educated me, as private developers are. An amendment to code was therefore needed in order for Sandpoint to fulfill a public need for improved stormwater treatment and improved recreational access to Sand Creek. Something else that people in this room might not know, the first draft of this amendment was presented to the commission in September. The 25-foot setback in the current code had been removed altogether, which would have allowed buildings to be constructed right up to the high water mark. While public comment was minimal at that time, the commission determined that the 25-foot setback should remain in code and requested that staff come back to the commission with the version that required conditional use permits for any structures within that setback. Later that month, a second draft was presented to P&Z along with a public hearing at which a growing number of citizens expressed their concerns over protecting water quality and preserving public access to Sand Creek. The P&Z Commission once again asked staff to rework the amendment further to strengthen the language protecting public access and water quality. We also requested that a public workshop be held and further conversations with various stakeholders take place before bringing another version of the amendment to City Council. That was 6 months ago. Today, we have heard the latest version of the amended code. A public workshop was held 4 weeks ago. Different stakeholder groups have been consulted. Council, the P&Z Commission, and the greater public have been included in the process of refining and improving the language in the proposed amendment. I believe the process that has taken place since the first draft of this amendment was presented demonstrates an example of how the system of citizen-informed representative government is supposed to work. The P&Z hearings provided staff the opportunity to better understand the concerns and desires of citizens. Staff went back to the drawing board and over several iterations of the language arrived at a version that I truly believe provides stronger protections to water quality and public access, the two pillars of our comp plan's vision for Sand Creek, than the current code does. The proposed amendment we heard today maintains the 25-foot setback for buildings described in current code. It maintains language around vegetative buffers, but unlike current code, requires that developers install a vegetative buffer or an engineered stormwater treatment system where there is not already adequate treatment within the 25-foot setback as part of the permitting process. The amended code requires that all buildings along Sand Creek be reviewed by the city to, quote, assure improvements to water quality, preservation of public access to the waterfront, and enhancements of aesthetics that contribute to community character, vibrancy, and experience. In other words, no new development will be permitted that does not do these things. Current code allows developers to build certain structures to within 10 feet of the high water mark without any permit, cutting the public out entirely from the process. Without an amendment, we should expect future developments along Sand Creek that fail to take measures to improve water quality, fail to meet community standards for aesthetics, and disregard the goal of improving public access to the water. The newly required CUP for all structures within the 25-foot setback, on the other hand, requires that developers provide evidence that any improvements made within 25 feet of Sand Creek meet 9 criteria, a few of which I believe should provide comfort to those citizens who have expressed concerns over the, quote, invitation this amendment could pose to developers to come build out downtown in a manner that disrespects our community's vision for the commercial waterfront. Specifically, in order for a CUP to be approved, a development must, quote, be harmonious with and in accordance with the general objectives or any specific objective of the comprehensive plan and or applicable sections of Sandpoint Code. Its use, quote, will not change the essential character of the area. It, quote, will not be detrimental to the economic welfare of the community. And, quote, it will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of a natural, scenic, or historic feature of major importance, in this case, Sand Creek. To those citizens who have emailed, texted, posted on social media, or called expressing a desire for council to reject this amendment, let me say that I believe your concerns about the overdevelopment of our downtown waterfront are warranted. It is highly likely that nearly the entire commercial waterfront between Bridge Street and Cedar Street will be sold, demolished, and rebuilt in the next 10 years. The same could happen south of Bridge Street. But a decision to reject the proposed amendment before us here today will do nothing to halt the development of downtown Sandpoint. It will only allow the development to take place with less citizen oversight, less protection for water quality, and less guarantee that public access to Sand Creek will be maintained, much less improved. Our job here today is to make sure that our code is written in a way that best assures that development that is coming fulfills the vision of the comp plan and the desires of our citizens as expressed through the public engagement process. On the matter of the comp plan, and this may address some concerns that I've heard from the community. One thing I would like to see moving forward with the updates that will commence soon is the addition of a chapter specifically dedicated to the city's public watershed, including the commercial waterfront along Sand Creek, but also the entire green belt stretching north past Schweitzer Cutoff Road and into the Little Sand Creek Basin. There is a strong desire in this community to protect both water quality and public access, whether that is via a public park at Farman's Landing, a nature trail north of the Popsicle Bridge, or recreational trails higher up in the Little Sand Creek watershed. Expanding public access for recreation assures that the value of this environmental resource is greater than simply the drinking water and wildlife habitat it currently provides, but extends that value to the greater public through recreational access. Recreation and conservation are two sides of the same coin. One of our greatest assets as a community is this beautiful drainage, which at present has almost no public access beyond the Cedar Street Bridge. We can do better, and I hope that in the update to the comp plan, we provide the public with the opportunity to articulate its desires for how our public watershed is managed for the future. To close, I'd like to commend city staff, including Jennifer, Amanda, and Amy, on the effort they put into this amendment to city code, and thank all the members of the public who provided input along the way. The process worked the way it is intended to, and however council votes today, it is my belief that the outcome of these efforts is a significant improvement over the current code regarding setbacks along Sand Creek. Thank you.
Your question in there?
That was a comment. I told you it was a comment. It's a long comment.
Okay, fair enough.
But
Any other questions?
This is the thing I've been focusing on more than anything else for about 9 months now. So.
Thank you for those comments.
Thank you for the comment.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I had a question, and there was a lot of material to read through because there was a lot of old material and such like that. And now my computer shut off. Okay, there it is. And I don't know if this piece was left in or was left out. And when I copied it to put into my notes, how I like to do this, for some reason, the letter didn't come up. And it talks about the conditional use permit piece. And it goes through avoid undue water, air pollution, an effective vegetated buffer, upland, applicable high water mark, shall be incorporated as one method of protection unless determined impractical by an Idaho licensed professional engineer or a licensed landscape architect. And I got a little confused why we chose a professional engineer and a landscape architect when, in my interpretation, we're talking about water quality issues. So why wouldn't this be more of a water quality professional? But my question may be irrelevant if this piece is not in there, but I do believe this piece is in there. So.
Mr. Mayor, would
Yeah.
you? I'm sorry. Thank you, Commissioner or Councilmember Rule. Licensed landscape architects actually do often design stormwater management systems. And so any system that was proposed would have to be reviewed by a licensed professional, whether that be an engineer or a licensed landscape architect. But ultimately, it has to meet our stormwater ordinance and has to be approved by the city engineer ultimately.
So then, even though in their titles, it doesn't push towards the water quality thing, they are trained in that area to know how that works. And then as a backup to that, we have our ordinances that, but who would then determine that on our end, if that makes sense? Does that make sense? Like our ordinance says it has to be good enough, but
It has to be designed to our stormwater ordinance standards.
okay.
It's our
And then that
specific
would take
standard.
care of the water quality piece because they're written to take care of the water quality.
Correct.
Okay, and that clarifies it for me. It just didn't seem as clear as I needed it to, and I didn't understand the background of those two professionals on a water quality level. I always think, you know, biologist and different things like that when I'm thinking about water quality professionals, so, or hydrologist, shall we say, not biologist. Excuse me. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah,
if I may?
please.
So to summarize also what Councilman Welker said, this code change actually makes it stricter, right? And before this, there was no trigger in the current code. There's no trigger to contact the state, the FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, whoever else is out in the middle of Sand Creek. But now the proposed code will have that in it, right? They will get notified. And then my second question, and I know I've asked you this before, but I'm going to ask it again. Businesses will not be allowed to cantilever out into Sand Creek, will they?
Yeah, please.
They will not be allowed, a building is prohibited from the 25-foot setback.
Thank
So a cantilever of a building is not allowed in the 25-foot setback. And to your first question, that is correct. This puts a requirement that we contact federal and state agencies who have jurisdiction below the high water mark.
And even in order to build a deck, you have to have a building permit, and that would set off a CUP, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from council?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
So I know I asked this at our last meeting, and it didn't come up until you made your comment, Kate, but I know that I believe Jennifer or Amanda clarified this, that there is one parcel that because of their previous building does have the ability to grandfather and build something. Can you explain that to the public, Amanda, just so they don't feel like there's double speak going on? I don't want to give them that impression. Because well, Amy, I'm sure, whoever chooses to answer that, sorry.
That's quite all right. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to address the
please.
question? So the question, I believe you're speaking specifically to 330 North First Avenue, which is the previous location of Arlo's, as well as Blue Lizard. That structure falls within a special classification with our code. Within our code, we don't refer to it as grandfathering. However,
Okay.
the understanding of what that means is pretty universal. Essentially, that structure was deemed unsafe by the city of Sandpoint, our building official, and it was required that it be demolished for safety reasons. There are provisions within our code that exist that if the city takes that action, that as a property owner, you have a right to build back to the existing footprint. Their existing footprint cantilevered over the creek, and they will therefore be allowed to do so. Again, should they apply for such a permit and go through that process. So you are correct that there is a particular property within city limits that has some special conditions for their situation.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Amy or Amanda, it's come up a number of times with some of the citizens of Sandpoint. Why does the ordinance have to take the full scope of Sand Creek versus just the downtown core of Sand Creek where Farman's Landing project would begin with the stormwater maintenance? Or mitigation, excuse me.
The best answer for that is that over the next however many years, if redevelopment happens north of the downtown, we want the same protections in place as we have downtown. So we don't think only downtown needs to manage stormwater to the greatest extent. It should be any commercial property that could potentially be redeveloped.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a question. Is there anything in here, and Jason made reference to the vision of a multimodal, or I should say, waterfront access / multimodal connectivity up along Sand Creek is envisioned in the Bonner County Trails Plan, maybe among other places. Is there anything in this ordinance or this amendment, I should say, that would encourage that kind of civic space to be developed by a private developer? Is there any incentive in this amendment that would encourage that kind of facility?
I would not say there is an incentive per se, but going through the conditional use permit process and reviewing a case-by-case project, how is the project implementing the comprehensive plan? If a property owner put in public access, that would certainly be that would be one of the standards of a conditional use permit that would be favorable to approve a project.
Okay, but there's nothing in the comprehensive plan that envisions or encourages a public access or multimodal connectivity along Sand Creek, is there?
No, but there is, Amanda just pointed out to me in the ordinance, the buildings will be reviewed for consistency to improvements to water quality, preservation of public access to the waterfront, and enhancements of aesthetics. So that is, if there is
Okay.
public access, you have to maintain it. But I think your question is more, is there anything requiring new public access?
Or encouraging?
Encouraging.
Yeah, we can't require it, right? We know that, but perhaps we could encourage it.
Right. And I don't know that that language is specifically in the ordinance currently, no.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Oh, and lastly, are there any, in this amendment, are there any design standards for any of this potential development that could happen within the 25-foot setback?
What happened?
Thank you, Amy. Mr. Mayor, I would say yes, however, not in a traditional design standard form. So references to best management practices are a form of a design standard. What we are not prescriptive about in the form of design standards is saying that these are the types of best management practices that we want implemented. So I'll give an example to that regard. If we're going to have a proposal within the 25-foot setback for a stormwater treatment system, rather than providing prescriptive design standards about how someone should design that stormwater treatment system, we would reference adopted best management practices. For example, the Department of Environmental Quality is one entity that produces best management practices that have very specific design standards, which are what water quality trained individuals use when they're making decisions, so that it's not just their idea, it's a collective proven method of those design standards. So the answer is yes, indirectly, but it doesn't go into the specificity and prescriptive manner.
And if you can answer me this, and to the best of your knowledge, in those best management practices, are there any design standards or requirements that that would include landscaping for development within that 25-foot setback?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. That's a great point and I think question. Yes, the answer is yes. So the difference between standards and guidelines is a standard is more prescriptive. A guideline is here are some things that could work depending on the conditions of the site. It's a simple way to explain it. What I anticipate as a result of how we see a variety of stormwater management plans come forward to the city that are relying upon these guidelines is it's typically a combination. And some of those solutions absolutely include landscape best management practices that provide surface treatment. That is included in our adopted Parks and Rec Master Plan. That image does include swales and some of that surface water treatment that you would see in addition to other types of treatments. So the combination of them is really kind of the beauty of being able to rely upon best management practices.
Thank you. All right. We will now prepare to proceed with the public hearing. Please note that as provided in the notice of public hearing and as stated within the meeting packet posted on the city website, all written comments are to be delivered to the city clerk. Those comments that were received by way of that stated procedure were either included in the meeting packet or, if received in time prior to the meeting, were forwarded to city council. This process must be followed to ensure comments are properly included in the permanent hearing record. I will now recite the standards for public testimony for this evening's hearing. Testimony shall directly address the subject at hand. Testimony shall not be personally derogatory toward any individual, organization, or business. Public comment opportunities during meetings are for comments only. Do not direct any questions to council or myself or to staff. In the interest of time, testimony shall not be repetitious and each speaker shall have no more than 3 minutes. If your testimony fails to comply with these standards, it may be declared out of order and you will be asked to cease. Those here in chambers who wish to speak will need to complete a sign-up form, as I mentioned earlier, up by the front door and hand it to the clerk before you. The forms, let's see, if you're on Zoom and wish to speak, please do raise your hand. I'm sorry, please do not raise your hand at this time. I will be calling for testimony from those participating remotely in just a few minutes. So, public hearing is now open and we will start with those here in the room. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone who has signed up to speak at this public hearing?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Chase Youngdahl.
Hey, good evening, Mayor, Council. Chase Youngdahl, City of Sandpoint resident for the record. I know that the guiding vision for the Farman's Landing has been the Parks and Rec Master Plan, which is fairly new. I haven't heard or seen of much mention of the new updated comprehensive plan. I know the city is still technically operating on the 2009 version of that. And with the new comprehensive plan pretty close to the finish line, I feel like this proposed code amendments kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit here. Being that a comprehensive plan is that's the guiding chief document for municipalities to follow and to base their codes and ordinances off of. So I just wanted to, based on some survey info that I gleaned from the Engage Sandpoint feature, the community's top priority for economic development is to support downtown and preserve the small town feel. And I think a case can be made, at least based on the staff info and illustrations here on the conceptual end of things, that it seems like it's almost trying to capture the big city vibe of Venice, Italy, or the San Antonio Riverwalk, which I feel kind of, it works counter to preserving our small town feel. So just for your consideration, appreciate the time.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Youngdahl. Madam Clerk.
Pam Duquette.
Could you step before the microphone, please? Thank you.
Okay, my name is Pam Duquette. I do live in town in Sandpoint. I have been here before to planning and zoning with Mr. Welker. I'm confused still. I know I can't ask questions, so I'm just going to share what I was going to share. I'm concerned about any allowance of structures through a conditional use permit. I think that it will start a precedence for other encroaching developments along the creek to extend past that 25-foot setback. I worry about the environmental impact of those developments. And I agree that we need to protect our precious waterways. And as a property owner, I am not in favor of an increase in my property tax in order to turn Sandpoint into a more upscale tourist town. I love Sandpoint like it is, and Sand Creek. And any extra minutes I have, if Molly McCann needs them when she presents on Zoom, may she have them? I can't ask a question.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for those comments, Ms. Duquette. Madam Clerk?
Patty Shook,
Hi, my name's Patty Shook, and I'm here for the same reason as she is. I like to bike the bike trail, and I'm worried that I won't even be able to come bike through that parking lot anymore to reach the bike trail. I want Sand Creek to be a welcoming, safe place for canoers and kayakers and paddleboarders. I don't want it to be, you guys to be inviting more motorboats to pollute the water and to especially erode the Sand Creek. I'm really worried about that. I'm against high-rise condos in town. I just hate that feel, especially along Sand Creek and the downtown core. I don't want my taxes raised again. And everybody I know agrees with me and with her and everybody here. But we're just afraid that our fears won't be heard. You know, you can hire professional architects and engineers. That can be cherry picked to say whatever you want them to say. And it's just frustrating. We want to keep Sandpoint sweet. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Shook, for those comments. Madam Clerk?
Crystal Shapiro,
I'm Crystal Shapiro. I'm a Sandpoint City resident. I've been in Sandpoint for 46 years. I've certainly come from other states where we see this kind of development happening and it breaks our hearts. So I'm new to kind of this process. I'm just sort of getting involved, but and I didn't know I couldn't ask a question because I have a big question, but the concern is the change in our beautiful tourist town that we have accepted because of all of its amenities, but to see it turn into Aspen and Vale and all these other communities, when we are the ones that have developed this and lived with this and have protected it. So to see some unanswered questions about when you said that in 10 years, it could change the whole structure and face of downtown. That was the scariest thing that I heard after having lived here all this time. So it's hard to say I'm for it or against it when I don't have all the answers yet, but height restrictions scare me, and changing the face of the retail downstairs or downtown to accommodate people coming in with a lot of money that can outbid anything that we would try to do. So I'm hoping that's part of the consideration is that kind of development that we're facing in the future. Let's keep what we have because it's wonderful and that's why people come here.
Thank you, Ms. Shapiro, for those comments.
Steve Holt,
Hi, my name is Steve Holt. And I do appreciate the work that staff has put into this. I'm from the Lake Pend Oreille Waterkeeper. Jason's comments are going to make it so that I'm just going to forget everything and sort of just wing it because I do want to address it. And I want everybody to know we are in support of this amendment. There are a lot of good things about it. There's a lot of good work that's been done on it. I'm pretty satisfied with the whole water quality piece on it and the stormwater management part of it. I think that there's a lot of good comments in there and there's some good restrictions. The part that concerns me is that I think there's just a couple things that we could do to make this just that much better. So if you imagine a multi-story building, you know, that's either condos or a hotel, and it goes to the 25-foot setback, yes, it stops there. However, from there forward and beyond, it could be solid concrete right now and into the creek. And we could cut off public access. So it might not matter that much between Cedar Street Bridge and Bridge Street, but north of the Cedar Street Bridge, all those properties right there, you can imagine if you had some sort of patchwork of public access, similar to the sidewalk patchwork that we have going on right now in our core, where we have, you know, one lot doesn't have a sidewalk because it didn't build. So I think that being able to just sit down, take just a little bit more time. I know, Jason, we've gone through this process and I know it's been tough and I know it's arduous and hard on staff as well. But I do think that if we can incentivize somehow public access, which I laid out in that email, I think there's a way that we can do that legally to allow them to come through there. Right. And then also, I do think it's important to have some design standards on this. We have design standards for parking lots. You got to put a tree every 4 spaces or something. You know, I mean, there are multiple design standards in the code right now. Why not do that on one of your most gorgeous waterfronts? I don't think it's that difficult. So I would just ask that we just take a step back. I know it's hard because we've come a long way, right? But just give us like 1 more month, okay? To like, maybe we can meet once a week for 3 weeks and really nail it down, really make sure that the public is satisfied, make sure these people are like clear on what can happen here. I don't see that there's any harm in that. There's no big timeline. And so I would just ask you to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Holt.
Mr. Mayor, I believe we have some city residents online who would like to speak. Can they raise their hand at this time?
Please.
Molly McCann.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Go ahead, Molly. Uh-oh.
Okay, you can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. It's Molly McCann with the Lakes Commission. Thank you for your time tonight on this important issue. I know you are aware of our position, but again, we are requesting you deny this code amendment as written or table the decision to allow for a more thorough process. I want to make it clear that we aren't in opposition to the development of private property along Sand Creek. We are simply opposed to this code amendment as the legal guide for how that development unfolds. It is currently lacking clarity, purpose, and teeth. We are also opposed to the inclusion of all Sand Creek commercial zones because anything outside the Parks and Rec plan has not been envisioned or discussed with the community yet. The character of Sand Creek from the powerhouse to Highway 200 varies greatly. And you may not want to allow the same uses near the chamber, for instance, that you would in the downtown core. The problems we see with this code amendment have been so difficult to articulate, but it comes down to the fact that the process has put the cart before the horse, to steal Chase's comment. For one, the current stormwater management regulations need to be beefed up and capable of full enforcement before this code is adopted. Your current stormwater ordinance requires all the same stormwater management and water quality protections listed in this code. I didn't see anything different in the code than is in the current ordinance. So whether something's grandfathered or not, you should be able to protect water quality and require vegetative swales now. And your stormwater ordinance should be the foundation for this code and something you depend on. So do that first. Update that first if it's needed. There also needs to be full understanding of what can be built into Sand Creek. The language regarding building allowances below ordinary artificial high water mark are confusing and need to be fully vetted before they become law. The conditional use language is very subjective without clear standards. So we hope you will include design standards for impervious surface allowances, landscaping requirements, material use, scale, principles, prescriptions that create consistency and are enforceable. The comp plan also needs to be updated with a vision for Sand Creek before these waterfront structures are legally allowed. The code needs to reflect the comp plan, and the conditional use permit needs the comp plan for justification of a decision. I know it is easy to imagine a bustling waterfront when you are standing at Farman's Landing or on the boardwalk, but that is because there is a boardwalk that connects people and businesses to the water.
Ms. McCann, I'm sorry, your time is up. Thank you for those comments.
You're welcome. I thought I had some additional time given to me.
Is that- Okay, you can have another minute.
I'm going to repeat from where I began. I know it isn't easy to imagine a bustling public waterfront when you are standing at Farman's Landing on the boardwalk, but that is because there is a boardwalk for the public that connects people and businesses to the water. But the reality is that boardwalk ends at Farman's Landing, and there all the way to Highway 200, there is no guarantee based on private land ownership that the public will have access to the water from downtown or any other commercial property. This is the opportunity to look at the development of Sand Creek realistically and plan for the future. This is such an important decision, and we need to get it right for the sake of Sand Creek and our community. We hope you give this the attention it deserves and deny this version of code. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for those comments, Ms. McCann.
Mr. Mayor, if there's anyone else online who would like to speak, if you'd please raise your hand.
And I would say the same if there's anyone in this room that has not, okay, it looks like we have one. You will need to give the clerk a sign-up card.
I have
Okay.
some others.
Oh, okay, great, thanks.
I don't see anyone else on Zoom raising a hand, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we'll come back to the room.
Kristen Steichen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Steik at Ponderay, and I'm actually neutral at this point because I do believe we need more information. Councilwoman Deb made a great point about the experts in the room. It would have been nice to have some experts invited in and given adequate time, more than 3 minutes. They're given the same amount of myself as a layperson, and I'd really like to hear what they have to say about it. One of the experts is that there's nobody here about stormwater filtration. It is an overall system. It is something that needs to be planned in advance so you can contextually analyze that according to the current amendment. Those are relatively complex systems. And currently there's 20 acres of stormwater from core downtown that's funneling into that stormwater area. And Councilman Jason, I just wanted to mention that in your comment, you said that each developer would be responsible for a water filtration system. And so that, to me, is eliminating the system out of the equation. So that, from an engineering standpoint, doesn't make a lot of sense. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I could have misunderstood your point. The workshop 4 weeks ago that was outdoors was actually an opportunity for the council to ask the questions. And there was no qualitative time for the public there. It was more or less to give updates, and it was not a workshop. So I wanted just to highlight that if there needs to be a hard definition of what workshop means. So if it doesn't meet the basic criteria, it's perhaps not appropriate to use that word, or it's just going to confuse. The other thing that can confuse me was that this amendment is stricter. It said that it's more strict. However, the Farman Landing project is currently in violation of the current code. So if the amendment was more strict, then it would make it less likely that this project was built. So I can't quite wrap my head around that. This is why I think another workshop is needed. As always, I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dyke, for those comments.
Rebecca Holland.
Sorry, I had to bring this. My printer doesn't work at home. Okay, hi, good evening. I'm Rebecca Holland. I'm a longtime resident and business owner, former business owner, now retired. First, I want to say I really appreciate Jason's comments tonight, and I am in full support of Molly McCann and Steve Holt's points that were made. I thought they were excellent. For starters, I want to also say that I'm 100% supportive of a stormwater program down at Farmers Landing. That property was bought for that purpose in 2016. And we know this project is supported by the comp plan, our community's vision of 20 years. And let it be noted that the concept of building structures beyond the shoreline is nowhere in the comp plan. There's nothing there. As you know, our comp plan is a legal document that you as a council need to follow, must follow. The Plaza Plan is a cantilevered structure, and this is not within the community's vision either in the comp plan. We know local residents support economic vitality for local businesses, but they do not support overdevelopment of structures into the creek from here, and it could go all to Highway 200. Nor do they support a large plaza cantilevered built at public expense. You won't find that in the comp plan. I hope you've all read Ben Olson's perspective in the Reader, Short-Term Gains for Long-Term Losses. Ben, born and raised here, shared the raw truth. And there's a lot of talk about that on social media. Why? Because everyone recognizes that basic city improvements are one thing, but exorbitant plans that will raise the overall tax base for the whole community results in higher property taxes for all, including your homes. And when property taxes go up, homes go up, and our town will be filled with more rich people's filling their portfolios with Airbnbs. Know this, please. This zone change can change the face of Sandpoint. It's negligent to pass this as is. You're being asked to table this. There's a lot of things that need to be put more into this, I believe. A conditional use permit without design standards is insufficient protections. The phrase water dependent use is vague. Planners I've consulted with say this part is not well written. I'll close. Thank you for your time. I know this is a struggle. We're all struggling with this. We love our town. We want to protect our lake and our creek. That's more important than anything. But let's get this right, because this is opening the door for overdevelopment in a way that is not going to be good, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Ms. Holland? Anyone else?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Yes, we've got one more.
Oh,
That would be for public forum unless, did you want to speak on this?
No.
oh,
That's for public forum, Mr. Mayor.
okay.
Mr. Mayor, there is a hand raised now.
Okay, thank you.
Helen Yost.
Hello, I'm Helen Yost, and I offer this testimony on behalf of 3,200 plus members, friends, and supporters of the regional climate activist collective Wild Idaho Rising Tide, or WORT, based for 6 years in downtown Sandpoint. And we would like to include these oral comments as well as ones that won't fit into the 3 minutes sent later by email in the public record. And so I'm just going to cherry pick some of this and say that instead of the trumpeted long-term gains of social and economic vitality, city plans for modified setback rules and a waterside public plaza would invite additional riparian deforestation and business overdevelopment of the Sand Creek corridor within and beyond downtown, further exodus of impacted local businesses and residents burdened with subsequently higher property taxes and rents, and land grab by real estate speculators who do not share community values for natural restorative places. These expensive projects that would result from this code change will predictably imperil rather than purportedly enhance public access to the rapidly dwindling downtown waterfront. While the short-term boondoggle may temporarily provide a greater tax base for the city budget, such a major code change will set a precedent for reckless growth for decades along city shorelines. In reviewing items 5A and 5B on this agenda for tonight's city council meeting, we question whether this city code change comports with state standards for best practices in streamside management zones and federal regulations for watershed management in urban areas. Sand Creek is classified as critical habitat for federally listed endangered species, threatened bull trout, and harbors habitat for several protected migratory bird species. We wonder how increased sediment and contaminant loads in Sand Creek introduced by runoff from greater surface areas of toxic building materials inflict city liability for diminished downstream drinking water quality and reduced resident and transient wildlife populations. I'll just close and skip more that we'll send by email, that we describe and share these grievances with city council, Sandpoint City Council members through testimony and following email comments as part of our request for your votes to reject or postpone the Sand Creek Code Amendment, especially with impending climate catastrophes in mind. We prefer that you as elected representatives uphold the best public interests by considering and implementing more sustainable and safer methods for maintaining the natural integrity and character of Sand Creek and city open space environments. Thanks for this opportunity for input.
Thank you for those comments, Ms. Yost. And Madam Clerk, anyone else?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you for that abundant public comment, everyone. The council will now discuss, and we will open up questions for staff from council members at this time, and I will start it off.
As a point of clarification, so the public hearing is now closed.
I'm sorry, apologies. The public hearing is now officially closed. Thank you, everyone.
To clarify also for the record, because the public hearing is closed, unless this council determines to table this, there will be no additional submissions that will be considered by council for deliberations.
Okay. No additional submissions from public. Okay. Okay. So I have a question for you, Ms. Jovic, if you can help me understand. Our current code requires a 25-foot vegetative setback with no exceptions. Is that legal?
Is a 25-foot setback in code?
Is a 25-foot vegetative setback, is it legal?
Yes.
It is. Okay, thank you. Council, any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. I think there was a lot of good insight from the public today and things to consider. I have a question. Is there any reason we would not want to table this? Is there a reason to push this quickly? Is there something maybe I'm missing there, or we're just?
Good question.
Yeah, is there an immediate need that we need to push this as opposed to table it and consider the I think, valid concerns here tonight?
Jennifer, Amanda, who wants to field that one?
I think you can do it. Yeah, so if you are inclined to table it and there's a motion.
You have the force.
You would need to articulate very specific direction to staff as to the additional information that you would need in order to be able to make an informed decision.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I would point out that it has been tabled twice before. This is not a new issue, although it's the first time it's been heard by council. This is the third time it's been heard by a commission of the public representatives. So that has been done twice before. So this is the third time it's been presented.
Appreciate that.
Thank you for that. What I will say, though, to your comments, Mr. Spiro, Councilman Spiro, is there were some specific things that I heard repeatedly from the public that the public felt were missing. And I heard at least 5 times any guarantee or incentive for public access was missing from this amendment. I also heard a concern around the lack of design standards, in particular around landscaping standards. One comment was that, we could end up with, the developer could build 25 feet to the high water mark of concrete, and of course, if every developer did that, then, you know, we just have a sea of concrete along Sand Creek, and I can imagine that that's certainly not what the public would envision there. There was also references to requests that this be something that's included in the comprehensive plan, which is up for continuation and revision later this year. In fact, in the next couple of months, it'll kick off again. I heard many times requests for tabling so that we could just have one more workshop to be able to kind of hash out some of these details. Generally, what I'm hearing from the public, and I'm paraphrasing, is that we've done a lot of really good work here, and I realize this is really a really difficult amendment. And there, you know, people feel very passionately about their waterfront, their downtown waterfront, and we want to make sure we get it right. And so I think it's worth, you know, being careful and making sure that we take the time. And certainly, this is the first time that this body has heard this at public hearing. So, you know, I'm hearing a request to just take that a little bit more time to make sure that we get this right. I'm also hearing obviously the concern for water quality is number one. And, you know, while we do have a separate ordinance for stormwater management that deals specifically with that, and this amendment refers to those standards, and it would be a separate consideration for us to consider, you know, improving or amending those stormwater standards. And, you know, I think clearly that there's a concern from the public to just understand that the expectations are being met in terms of this amendment is adequately protecting those standards, and that there's enough within the stormwater management ordinance, management ordinance that is able to capture the desired effect that we're after here. So, you know, you asked the question, you know, why table it? Actually, your question didn't get answered, but I hear, you know, our wonderful attorney, Fonda Jovic, saying that we have to have specific guidance for staff. And that's some of the specific guidance that I'm hearing. So if you know, if I was a council person making that motion to table for another constructive workshop, those would be some of the elements that I would want to focus on. But back to your question, it's a great question. Jennifer, Amanda, could you tell us why what's important about the timing here and what we're trying to,
I'll start. I may have to hand this to Amanda, Mr. Mayor. One of the reasons for moving this through is, and the timeline associated is for the Farman's Landing project. Council's approved the budget for this year for design and permitting for the Farman's Landing, and particularly focused on the stormwater management there. While we have been working through code and working through the revisions to code, it's putting that particular project on hold, including a stabilization, bank stabilization project that would be a part of that. So the way that our current code is written, we are not able to move forward with the Farman's Landing project. In terms of other risks with delaying on the code, currently our code does not allow for structures within the 25-foot buffer, but the code as proposed revisions does put some increased teeth in structures such as docks and things that private property owners may want to construct now. And currently our code doesn't speak to that at all. So they can go ahead and do that without getting a building permit from the city, without having to go through a conditional use permit, without having to go through any of these processes that are part of this code revision.
Mr. Mayor, may I add a few comments to that? For the last
9 months to a year, we as staff have been having a lot of conversations and hearing from public and various stakeholders. Many of the points that were brought up this evening, I think, are valid and incredibly important to move forward. And one of those that as I was taking note, really taking a closer look at our stormwater management ordinance. I can speak for all of our team in saying that we wholeheartedly agree. That ordinance hasn't been updated in a really, really long time. It is a top priority for staff. That effort is going to take us much longer than the 9 months that we have spent on 2 pages of an ordinance change. So for us to hold off on this change until we update a stormwater ordinance, we're talking years, literally. That requires a very robust conversation. That also requires multiple workshops, all which are well-deserved, and we intend to carry forward 100%. It's just going to take some time, as will a comprehensive plan update take some time, as we've all experienced. I will also say design standards take a long time for us all to agree upon prescriptive standards that need to apply to every single property without relying upon a guiding document such as best management practices. And those manuals are hundreds of pages long. That is why we ultimately landed where the ordinance is today, where we're heavily relying and kind of working with our partners, which are the state and federal agencies that have spent all of that time on really looking at, these are the types of systems that you need to be considering when you're looking at stormwater. And, I think the Lakes Commission just hit the nail on the head in many regards, speaking to the variety of ways in which to do that. And it takes a lot of thought. Our hope is that this ordinance buys us some time. I think it's a short-term improvement. I don't think that, Amy and I've spent a lot of time discussing that this isn't going to be the forever code. I think there's certainly more opportunities to improve it as we continue to modify these documents and plans. But for us to continue with tabling it, which certainly is within your purview to do, and with some specific instructions, staff will obviously continue that conversation as we should. This isn't a month or 3 weeks of meetings. This is months to years of a delay potentially in a project that we're trying to implement. And if that's ultimately the choice, we understand. But the intent with the budget that was adopted was to start applying for permits now, so that we have some hopes of being able to construct and get further grant dollars to deliver this project within the next 2 to 3 years. So starting now, we'll deliver in 2 to 3 years. Starting later, we'll kick that project even further. And we purchased the property in 2017.
Yeah. Thank you for those comments, Amanda and Jennifer. And I would just, mention to council hearing that, we actually perhaps have a fourth path here. So of course we could approve this ordinance as written. We could deny it. Of course, it could be amended, although given the public nature of the public hearing, it's really not advised that we make any substantive changes to the amendment. But the third option, of course, would be to table and presumably to hold a workshop. But then there's a fourth path, and that could be to approve the ordinance with the condition that we reconvene on this issue in, let's say, 12 months or something like that, and with specific direction to staff to focus on those few issues that we think could be improved with this ordinance. That would give the city the opportunity to move forward with the engineering and whatnot for Farman's Landing. But it would be a commitment, a public commitment that we make to the public that we're going to review these and improve it, knowing that there's some improvements that could be made, and give staff specific direction to achieve that in the next year or whatever time the council decides is appropriate. So we've got a variety of options here, and I will now open it up to other council members with questions or comments.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Unless you guys want to, with the fourth option, would there be a concern, let's say that a property owner would pull a permit, say in the next 5 months, how would that work with our suggestions? And then
Sure.
then
Yeah.
here in the meeting tonight, be like, oh, we better get it in now. So
Yeah, well, when they pull the permit, the rules are what they are when you pull the permit, right? So, but, and yeah, we could see property owners that do that in the next year or whatever period of time. But, as you can see, development happens pretty slow and steady. And so it would be pretty shocking to see it just, blow up. But yeah, that certainly is possible.
okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Just a couple observations. We heard once again concerns from the public tonight about water quality. I would point something out that from the public hearings and planning and zoning, the language was actually changed from a previous version of this amendment from any development within the 25-foot setback has to protect water quality to all buildings and structures must assure improvements to water quality. So in fact, the language as it's currently written in this version requires that water quality stormwater measures are taken to not only like maintain the quality of water that's flowing into the creek, but improve that quality of water. So the idea that suddenly we could have concrete patios going out to and beyond the water without any stormwater mitigation techniques in place is, I think, not something that we should expect to see from this. So that language was added, that improvements to water quality must be included in any proposals for development within the 25-foot setback. Another point, there's been a lot of talk about some addition to the code language that would guarantee public access within through any development on private property. I just wonder how legal, you talk about legal, like what can we require? I don't know if there's any precedent for cities requiring private developers to provide public access through their private property. I certainly wouldn't want a sidewalk going through my backyard for the public. And but again, the language does require maintaining and protecting, and that's what's in our comp plan. The comp plan doesn't ever say that we need to expand public access through private properties. We do have robust language in this version of the code that protects public access, and that's what's in our comp plan. That's what our park plan is all about. So those are just a couple points I had. The broader, I think, concern, the fear of overdevelopment in Sandpoint. Personally, I don't think that this is an invitation. I think that the booming market that we have here is the invitation. That development is coming. If we don't amend this code, it's going to come in a way that actually threatens our water quality and threatens public access that does exist because we don't have those protections in current code. And you asked about whether it's legal to require a vegetative buffer. Actually, from how I read it, and I haven't talked to Fond about this, but our current code doesn't require a vegetative buffer. It requires that an existing vegetative buffer is maintained. But anybody who's walked along Sand Creek or paddled a stand-up paddleboard knows that large swaths of our commercial waterfront have no vegetative buffer. So there's nothing in current code that requires developers install a vegetative buffer. The new version of this code requires the installation of a vegetative buffer or an engineered stormwater treatment solution where a vegetative buffer is not allowed or not possible. So again, this is far more robust. This provides guarantees that we will have improvements to water quality and protects public access where current code doesn't do any of those things. So if we want to get ahead of development and protect our town from the kinds of overdevelopment, we hear things about building heights. That has nothing to do with this. That's not what we're talking about tonight. That's a different part of code. But this code amendment protects us from the overdevelopment that so many people in here fear because that development is coming whether we amend code or not. If you call it overdevelopment, that's a subjective term, but the development is coming. We see it. We have burnout, just demolished lots on First Avenue. I'm sure that those developments are waiting to see what we do. If we do it right, then those developments will protect the public interest. If we don't do anything, we're going to see development without any need for a CUP. There's no public oversight in that case. So just some thoughts.
Can I just parrot back a couple things that I think I heard from you to make sure I understand what you were saying there? And I think, I hear from you what I'm hearing from most everybody, and that is that this code is clearly an improvement over what we have today. And both for water quality standards and just for overall, built environment, if you will. And it certainly would enable us to do, accomplish the vision that the community wants to do in developing the Farmans waterfront down there. But the piece that I want to kind of focus on a little bit is you had mentioned, yes, of course, we cannot require a property owner to, do anything on their property, right? Whether it's install well, let me step back. We can't, and that's what the question that I had, Fonda, about the 25-foot setback, because my understanding was that that would basically be seen as a taking. If we say you can't do anything on 25 feet of your property because we say so, that would be a taking. Is that not true?
Pose additional requirements that are burdensome to the private property owner's rights beyond what they currently have right now without risking a taking. The same with the requiring public access. There's certainly an opportunity in the application by application process to negotiate public access with individual developers, but that would come through that design process and the CUP process. And there's a give and take, or maybe they agree to sell us an easement for public access, but that happens on a private property by private property analysis and negotiation during their design process.
Yeah. So, bottom line, we can't require, we can't require them to not use or to use in a specific way a certain part of their property. Right. And, but you mentioned the incentives, and there is an opportunity, the way that I see it, to provide an incentive. And that is because if we're allowing certain kinds of development to happen through a conditional use permit process, we can also allow certain kinds of development not through a CUP process. So thereby is the incentive. There's an additional layer of work, if you will, from a developer to go through the conditional use permit process. And there's going to be conditions potentially placed on that, right, by the city. So that gives the city the opportunity to leverage on that developer by giving them the liberty to develop things that fit within the city's vision. Let's call it public access, by not requiring that CUP process. So if the designs around that are tight enough that the city feels confident that that kind of development fits within the vision of the city, those standards are tight enough, then you can just allow the developer by right to be able to build that improvement because it grants public access. If it's something that doesn't provide public access, but it meets every other standard of the amendment that we're proposing, then it has to still go through the CUP process. So that's the kind of leverage that I'm talking about. So I think it's important to understand that there are tools that the city could use like that to encourage public access. We can't require it, but we could encourage it.
My response would be that I'm hesitant to cut the public hearing process out of any development within the 25 feet. Right now, we already have the ability within code for development within 10 feet, up to 10 feet from the high water mark, to occur without any public engagement at all through the, as it says in code, permeable decks. And we've seen this kind of development in the, I don't know the name of the building south of Bridge Street, where they built a deck right down to the waterfront without any permit. It wasn't Spuds, actually, it was the building next to that, a permeable deck. But there was no, hearing process, no CUP, no planning and zoning hearing. So exempting certain types of structures because somebody on staff believes that might be to the public benefit, but no one from planning and zoning or city council ever has a chance to review that, I think is a risk. And so that's why I prefer the CUP to be in place for all structures. And we went through this several times in P&Z as well.
Fair enough, but just to be fair, we do have standards for things like that. Like we have standards for civic spaces, for instance. So that's an example of a code reference that could be applied that already exists there would be additional standards presumably that you'd have to place to, that are specific to, developments on Sand Creek. But I just want to highlight that certainly there are mechanisms that could be applied. But I hear your point. And does anyone else want to ask a question or make a comment?
I do, but I'll let them go first.
It's not, so with respect to public comment and how I read this and how I've heard this through our discussion, this as written is an effort to actually put the horse where it belongs, as opposed to the analogy that's been used tonight, the cart in front of the horse. This provides us an opportunity to put the horse back where it belongs and then also prepare for multiple other horses if they are in alignment with that cart. If we don't do, and I'll leave it at that. So I think that our staff has done a good job. I think the public is rightful to be concerned and value the public comment. I can understand the anxiety that this creates. So maybe similar to the anxiety that our community felt when the byway was being discussed. It took decades for that to be discussed, and maybe similar to the way Memorial Field was discussed. I can understand and appreciate the anxiety that our community has felt. We have those things to point to, that the byway is amazing. The Memorial Field is fantastic. Earlier this evening, we saw how well our staff has committed to the public, and look at the amazing things that are going to be in front of us. We have, I see this as yet another opportunity to continue to succeed with a forward-facing view, while understanding and appreciating the anxiety that some of our community members have.
Mayor, go ahead, Jason. Look like you want.
I was just gonna say, again, kind of going back to something I said in my statement earlier, this is not in lieu of an update to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan needs to look very closely at the public waterfront, and not just this, quarter mile between the two bridges. I'm talking all the way up several miles into the watershed. And it would be expected that code would be amended in the future to reflect whatever ends up in the comp plan with regards to the public's desire for the watershed and for the Sand Creek drainage. So this is not the final version of this code, as Amanda said, but this is needed now because the development is coming now, and not changing code isn't going to stop the development. But not changing code will allow development to go forth without as much public oversight or guarantees to water quality or public access.
Mayor, I want to be clear that I probably don't appreciate the amount of time, staff, Jason, you've put into this. So my comments are coming from that perspective that I probably don't have a clue. So I do respect that very much. And the time it's taken, Jason's absolutely right that development is coming whether we like it or not. And some would say it's fortunate, some would say it's unfortunate. Property rights is a big deal. There's a phrase I used to say when people come to the restaurant, welcome to Idaho, we're not in a hurry. I feel like with the pressure of since COVID and everybody moving here, I always feel that we're playing catch up and we're always in a hurry. So from my perspective is, why do we need to be in a hurry? Which was to my original question, what's the big deal? Development is coming. What I see here and here online is community's concern. They're involved. I have not heard from any developers coming in here, putting their 2 cents in. That, to me, that speaks big, right? The owners of those properties, where are they? Maybe I've missed them, but I haven't heard them speak tonight. I don't really care who buys what or how much money somebody has. That's completely up to them. So my pockets are very shallow, so nobody's in them. So I don't really care about if somebody has to wait to build. So we did a moratorium on the airport because there was concern. We had to think through this. And I don't hear anybody tonight say that this new update is bad, just more we need to put more thought into it. So what would be wrong, and I could be out of place here, with putting a moratorium on building of any kind right there. So we do this one right. I don't care if it takes 10 years. I really don't care how long it takes. I don't care how much staff has to put into it. What I mean by that, not that I don't care about their time, but this is our community. This is what we were elected for. And again, I appreciate the time, Jason. Again, I probably don't appreciate it enough. It's what we're elected for. It's what your job is to make sure we do it right. And that could be where we come back right to this and the fifth iteration. Again, I don't really care. If we have to pick up another Wednesday to touch on it again, I'll do it. That's just me though. And I'm speaking for myself here, what I'm hearing tonight. I don't see any developers here telling us their concern or their desire, what they want it to look like, and coincide with the comprehensive plan. And so far all the major meetings we had, everything comes back to the comprehensive plan needs to be updated. And I think that's the concern with the cart before the horse is the comp plan is possibly the horse. And that's just my perspective, my opinion. And that's what has not been updated. So what would be wrong? And I'm talking out loud. What would be wrong with the moratorium? Again, I have no idea what's going on with developers and staff and what their desires are. They're not here tonight. I'm not hearing it, but I'm speaking on to what I'm hearing tonight. Again, is that even legal to do a moratorium on building of any kind? So we do get it right. And again, if it takes 4, 5, 10 years, I'm hoping my kids live here. So I want to do it right. And I may not be the one sitting here when it's finalized, so be it. But those are my thoughts, and I could be out of place on some things. I'm open to correction. Why are we in a hurry?
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna answer you.
Every
I'm just
single
gonna- Every single one. Just my comments, I guess, would be there has been a lot of hard work put into this, and I think that sometimes up here we're looking for perfection, and sort of in my personal opinion, that perfection doesn't really exist, but we can strive for excellence. And we can revisit things just as we do in life when we make mistakes in different places. I think that we stand to have more things happen by not doing anything. And just my perspective would be that this is a pretty good iteration. And I would potentially like to see us come back and revisit some of these things in 6 months on a timeline. And the reason I say that is I would like staff to maybe come up with some stronger language or ideas that would incentivize that public access. I disagree with the mayor leveraging the CUP piece of that. I think that the CUP is good across the board, but I would really appreciate, I think the public would appreciate something that does incentivize that. And then I would like to speak to, I think some of the public concerns are looking at the recreation master plan piece of this. And I'd like to assure the public that all those designs are going to be very vetted. And if some of those pictures that are out there in the public that you kind of see continually, there's sort of a very vague vision. It doesn't mean those things are going to be built. Again, there's some artistic renderings of possibilities. And before those final things are designed, the public's going to have a greater opportunity to talk about how they actually want to interact with Sand Creek at the Fireman's Landing area. So that was probably a little more wordy than I wanted it to be, but.
Counselor, can I ask you a question about that?
Yes.
So I heard you say that you're into the idea, or you support the idea of incentivizing public access on Sand
Correct.
Creek, but you're not in support of the idea of using the CUP to do that. So I see two ways potentially that the city could have any leverage whatsoever to incentivize public access, and one of those would be to not require a CUP, and the other would be to not allow development at all, right? So right now we don't allow any development in the 25-foot setback, but we could allow development through CUP if it allowed public access. Or we could, the CUP option that I shared earlier, development in the setback would require a CUP, but it wouldn't require a CUP if it met certain standards and required allowed public access. So do you see any other ways that the city could have any leverage to actually incentivize public access?
Mr. Mayor, I guess that's why I'm saying I would like staff who are the experts. I'm a physical therapist. And I did sit on the planning commission, so I'm aware of a lot of stuff. Fonda is the legal expert, that we give staff an opportunity of a number of months to come up with some ideas that could then be explained to myself as a layperson that might potentially work or not potentially work. But I think that we have maybe not a perfect document in front of us this evening, but we have an excellent document that has been, you know, run through the ringer numerous times in planning commission, and staff has worked very hard on. And my concern would be that if we do nothing at this point, that the development is going to come and the standards we have now are less than what's sitting in front of us. But it is, so those are my wishes. I'm not an expert enough to know what all those options would be. What you're saying, I understand it and I grasp it, but I would have to process that for a longer time frame than this evening is going to give me. I'm not a rapid processor. I wake up in the middle of the night and go, aha, okay, yeah, that makes sense. No, it doesn't. So that's why I would request that, you know, staff can bring more information to me. Fonda can put in her legal advice on top of that, tell us what is or isn't, because a lot of times we come up with great ideas that aren't legal. So I don't want to do that this evening.
Okay, go ahead, Kate.
I just would like to concur with several of my council members, Welker and Andy and Deb. I'm worried about that if we don't put this in place now, because it is stricter, and at the workshops, yes, it was for city council to ask questions, but there were community members who had their questions answered as well. And I think that if we don't do it, what is going to happen that could happen sooner? Because we know, you know, there are opportunists out there that will say, hey, okay, well, they didn't pass that code, so let's get this in while we can. And I'm concerned about that because it will change the face of our community. And so I think, and as for a moratorium, if I remember correctly, that our infrastructure has to be pretty much failing before we can, by law, have a moratorium on building. Is that correct?
I have not heard any legal grounds that would justify a moratorium.
Right. And I think in that we had a discussion about that, and it said if your sewer systems are failing because you have too many people here, that would be one of the only reasons why you could do a moratorium. So I think that that's out of the question to do that, but I concur. We have gone over this time and time again, and I think the language in this has really been vetted. I do think that, yes, we could come back and we can change it, because that's what we're doing here, right? We're amending a code. And so I just think it's time to look at this, and I'm just afraid of what will happen if we don't do it.
Thank you for those comments. Go ahead.
Appreciate you answering the question. We need a legal reason for a moratorium. So that helps a lot.
So I think what I'm hearing is, you know, general consensus amongst the council that they're in support of this amendment. But I'm also hearing that maybe there's also a need for greater attention to detail on maybe a couple items. And so I think I'm wanting to hear from all council members if they want to commit to that and commit staff to that, because what happens is, yes, this is what we do. We amend ordinances, right? But if we don't make a commitment, then what happens is we amend this ordinance and then we get busy. We get busy doing other things because, believe me, staff is already overwhelmed with all the ordinances and all the amendments and all the things that they do to make this city run as beautifully as it does. And so without council stating clearly what their priorities are, with a commitment that's expressed through passage of an amendment, for instance, then we don't necessarily come back to it. And it's usually through some accident that it comes back before council. So I would want to hear from the council members how they feel about that. But I want to ask a question of staff too, because I'm really interested in this idea of incentives. And, Councilwoman Rule posed made the statement that she would like to hear from council. And I know that this is, from staff, from the experts about what could our options be. And I know that this has been a topic, incentivizing public access, that's been part of the debate in developing this amendment from the beginning. And so I'd like to ask Amanda, you've been with us from the beginning. What has been considered thus far around how to provide some kind of incentive for public access on Sand Creek? In the process of the development of this ordinance over time, I know we've been working on a long time, and there have been comments from the beginning about we want to encourage public access. What have we considered thus far that could be potential incentives for public access?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would echo Amy's prior statements that what we've considered is reflective in the draft ordinance before you this evening, which is basically stating that if you would like to do structures within the 25-foot buffer, you need a CUP. What that allows us to do is say, if you're going to get a CUP, then you have to meet certain conditions, right? Certain criteria to qualify to get that CUP. And we are pretty specific in the incentives, which is in section D of the proposed ordinance. And that says, as Amy mentioned, it's not just looking for consistency with the comprehensive plan, but it's also with our adopted planning documents. So for example, our adopted Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and that providing the public access that's represented in that area. So a developer is incentivized to meet the conditions and requirements of this code to be able to obtain their conditional use permit. An additional incentive that Amy mentioned that we've incorporated that was considered at length and added are the measures to ensure that improvements to water quality are included. That's an incentive to a developer to make their case to the public, to planning and zoning, and potentially to city council that they have done everything possible to improve water quality and to preserve public access to the water, as well as maintaining that community character. So when the Planning Commission is reviewing an application, this code, the way it's laid out, is saying, developer, you're incentivized to meet what we've just told you we want you to meet here in section D. Show us how you're going to do that. And then there's a public process and a commission and ultimately council and potentially appeal to really vet that thoroughly. So those are the incentives that were considered, and that's what's reflected in the draft ordinance. Nothing beyond that has been considered that I'm aware of.
Thank you. So council, of course, the floor is yours. If there's any other questions or comments, if everybody is feeling like there aren't, then perhaps you can weigh in on whether you would like to support or deny this ordinance as is, or whether you want to do so with an amendment, or I'm sorry, an amendment to the motion. There isn't a motion, but if there was a motion to approve, an amendment to that motion that would require staff to come back with consideration of one or more of the items that we've discussed for further review at some point in the future.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Question for Fawn. Would we have to amend this motion, or could we simply direct staff that we would like to see this come back in front of us in 6 months?
You can approve the ordinance as drafted and provide direction to staff with follow-up for the future without it being included in the motion.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Mr. Mayor, I heard one comment from the public just asking for 3 more weeks. What, Fonda, legally, what would we need to do? Say council decided to, obviously this is better than what we have, and I don't think there's any denial of that, but if I feel that what I've heard tonight is possibly a little more public input might be nice before we finalize anything, would that be too much to ask for say, one more month of input from the public, and then we come back for a final decision. Am I not being clear?
Yeah, I'll just say to that, what I did hear pretty clearly from staff is that, that's a pretty tight timeline, like too tight to be able to accomplish the thought that's required to come up with a, quality consideration. I think, but, don't let me make up your mind for you. But clearly I heard that from him, some of these things that we're talking about, certainly if we're talking about design standards, that's a longer term consideration. Unless it's like, certainly this is up for debate, maybe there's a workshop in a month. And by the way, it's unrealistic, I think, to put an expectation on staff to do a weekly, review and revise code, week by week for the next month, right? I think it is conceivable to say something like, we will have a public workshop in a month. And even that would be a pretty heavy lift for staff right now, I think, but I think probably achievable. If Jennifer was here, I would ask her how she feels about that. But I'm asking Amanda and she's like, we could probably pull that off. Okay. So that is feasible, but then, what we're looking at is a simple kind of change, like, maybe we're going to require, one tree every 30, whatever, I don't know, 500 square feet or something. If you're developing within a plaza, within that 25-foot setback, there's going to be some sort of very basic, very standard, landscaping requirement, for instance, right? Or something that's, relatively small and simple. If it gets as complex as like a whole host of design standards, that's just, it's overwhelming, right? It's too much. So it is certainly possible, but if we're talking about, some little tweaks and little changes, a little bit here and a little bit there, totally possible. If it's, more than that, then it's not enough of a timeline.
Mr. Mayor, may I clarify that
Yeah,
just a little bit?
please.
So a motion to table this decision would be for the purpose of getting additional information from staff so that you can approve or deny the ordinance in front of you. That's it. If we're talking about further public input and further revision to this ordinance as your request, that is different. That is a denial of this ordinance with direction to staff to get more public input, to offer these other pieces. And this process goes back to planning and zoning.
Okay.
So I
Thank
just
you
want
for
to be
that.
clear on the process. The direction to staff to do something different that might substantially change the language goes back to P and Z. It doesn't come back to you.
And so then it becomes subjective, what's substantial, right?
Well, correct. But if you're talking about removing CUP requirements as incentive for public access, planning and zoning was very clear on their recommendation to this council about wanting that CUP component. So now you've substantially changed what planning and zoning has recommended to you. So it would go back to them with your comments and access to this hearing.
Okay. Thank you, Fonda.
Thank you.
I'm ready to make a motion to approve as written.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve. Let me read the title, please. An ordinance of the city of Sandpoint and municipal corporation of the state of Idaho, amending certain sections of Title IX Sandpoint zoning ordinance, to wit, Chapter 2, Section 1 through 4, building setbacks, to delete the term setback from Sand Creek, Chapter 2, Section 1, to add a new subsection 1092-1-10, special standards for properties adjacent to Sand Creek, providing for repeal and severability, and providing for publication and an effective date. There's been a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion to approve? Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Fonda?
Yes.
At this point, if I did want to ask staff to bring this back to us in 6 months with some different options to incentivize public access, would that be the appropriate time to do that?
Finish this motion first and then offer some direction to staff after that.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Welker,
Yes.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Sprow,
Yes.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Rule.
Yes.
The ordinance has passed its first reading by title only, and the summary is approved. I would entertain a motion that the rules requiring 2 separate readings, once in the ordinance's entirety, be suspended and the ordinance pass its second and third readings under suspension of the rules. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Sprow,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Welker,
Yes.
Counselor Dick.
Yes.
The motion passed, and this ordinance is considered read, passed, and adopted under suspension of the rules. And Councilwoman Rule, take it away.
Yes, I would like to direct staff to bring this back in front of us within a 6-month timeframe with some maybe stronger language to incentivize public access. And if anybody else had other potential concerns, they could add them in now, but for now, that's what my largest concern is. So, and however that would affect structures, or although I would like to leave that CUP in place, I think that's important, but I'll let staff make those decisions and how they should bring it. Thank you.
And just for clarification, that also will go to planning and zoning first.
That's
Thank
fine.
you. That's great. So council, are there any other items that either we discussed or didn't, but that you think should go in that staff direction as well? Seeing none. And as far as, I think it's important for staff to understand how much enthusiasm is coming from this body for that request. So can I just see, can you please, for the record, just let staff know if you support that or not? This isn't a vote, but I think it's important.
Support them coming back.
Support the direction to staff to come back with stronger language that incentivizes public access on Sand Creek.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit less concerned about public access, and not that I don't value it. Trust me, I stand up paddleboard, I swim from the public access that exists, but I'm also cognizant that there's about 1.5 miles of public access on the other side of the creek, the entire length of the creek, and that we live in a state where watercrafts can, or I should say the public can use public waterways without any through private property. So there's already public access through private property along Sand Creek. I was recently in Wyoming, and believe it or not, private property owners that own property into a creek are welcome to put barbed wire fences straight across that creek. So fishermen and paddle boarders and kayakers and canoers using a public right of waterway might encounter a barbed wire fence right across the creek. We are so fortunate not to live in a state like that. So we have outstanding public access along Sand Creek. My request for direction to city staff would be around the urgency that we place on getting the comp plan updated. I know that's not related to this, but in relation to this code, once the comp plan is updated, we look at this code very carefully to get, again, to make sure it reflects the values that the citizens involved in that comp plan update have articulated about the public waterway through Sandpoint. So public access, not such a big issue, because I think we have world-class public access as is, and it's already protected very vigorously in the code language that we have. It's more about that, looking at this again after the comp plan. So just letting the citizens know this is not the final say on Sand Creek. This is a temporary stopgap to make sure that the development that takes place goes through more rigorous public hearing process than it currently would. But once the comp plan is updated, and I think we need to have a special focus on the Sand Creek component of that comp plan.
Thank you for those comments, and that certainly is the intention. So.
Mr. Mayor, just quickly to add to that, historically, I don't know if you were involved then, Jason, that there was a vision in the community that the boardwalk would potentially extend all the way up to the Healing Garden. And so I guess some of that was knowing that there was a large portion of the community that ultimately wanted to see something like that happen. So that was sort of a part of the reasoning behind why I encouraged staff to look for that. Because I know that at some point back before my time, we lost the waterfront going from Sandpoint Beach all the way up to the current Bay Trail. So we don't have access in front of those condos. But
But basically I heard a no there.
As with regards to Deb's.
Deb's request.
I'm not
Staff.
saying no, I'm just saying it's not as of great importance to me
Okay.
as the comp plan.
Okay. Anyone else want to chime in on that?
Just vote.
No, nobody wants to chime in. Okay.
Huh? Oh, you don't need to vote. Oh, okay, understood.
Just supportive.
Huh?
Just supportive of it. There is no vote. for
There's
this?
no vote.
Okay.
There's no vote. I just think it's
Support, not
important to express this. I feel it's important. Do you feel it's important? I think it's
Yeah, I
important.
do.
I'd certainly rather you all tell them together than each of you one at a
Mhm.
We're supportive.
We're supportive.
We support
Okay, there you
staff.
go.
There we go.
They're on Deb's team.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to move on. There's another agenda item still. The next public hearing pertains to proposed amendments to City Code Title IX, Chapters 1 and 4, in order to remove references to tourist home and update definitions. I will now yield the floor again to City Planner Amy Tweeten.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, this was the ordinances that we asked for a slight amendment to. We will not be considering Chapter 2, Section 1-3. But we will be considering Chapter 1, Section 3 and Chapter 2, Section 3-2. So again, why are these amendments being proposed? The proposed amendments to Title IX are part of a continued effort to refine city codes for relevance, enforcement implications, and improved outcome. The Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on the proposed amendments on September 7th, 2021, and recommended adoption of the ordinance to City Council at its meeting on September 2nd, 2021. The first section of the amendments is under definitions, and that is to replace the existing definitions for building, building line, structure, and structure to add new definition for, and to add a new definition for setback. And this is to provide consistency with the recognized codes currently adopted and periodically amended by the state of Idaho, including the International Building Code. And then the second change to definitions is to remove the definition for tourist home. And that is to avoid confusion with regulations we have in Title III, Chapter 12, pertaining to short-term rentals. And then the change to Title IX, Chapter 2, corresponds to the removal of that definition, and it would remove tourist homes from the use table in the mixed-use residential district. So those are the three proposed amendments. And again, the options before you are to adopt the ordinance, deny the ordinance, or postpone action on the ordinance with direction needed, additional information, or changes to staff.
Thank you, Amy. Any questions, council? All right. We will now proceed with the public hearing. Please note the standards for public testimony recited earlier are still in effect. The public hearing is now open. Once again, we'll begin with city residents. Didn't mention that last time. Are there any residents within the Sandpoint city limits in attendance here in chambers who have signed up to speak, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, not unless any of those who spoke on the other matter wish to speak on this as well.
Anyone? Okay. Are there any non-city residents here who want to speak on the matter? Are there any, is there anyone on Zoom that would like to speak on this matter? Either residents or non-residents?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Hearing none, that concludes our public hearing. Council will now deliberate. Are there any questions for staff at this time? All right, I will read the title. An ordinance of the City of Sandpoint and Municipal Corporation of the State of Idaho, amending certain sections of Title IX, Sandpoint zoning ordinance, to wit, Chapter 1, Section 3, definitions, to modify, add, or delete certain definitions, chapter 2, section 1 through 1-3, to require.
Point of order. I believe that was the section that was removed.
Right. Chapter 2, section 1-3 was.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Let me start over. An ordinance of the city of Sandpoint and municipal corporation of the state of Idaho, amending certain sections of Title IX Sandpoint zoning ordinance, to wit, chapter 1, section 3, definitions, to modify, add, or delete certain definitions, to require the application of multifamily design standards contained in the residential multifamily RM zone to multifamily structures in the commercial C zoning designation, and chapter 2, section 2, to delete.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, that's the one we deleted, putting the multifamily into the commercial C zone. It's just the tourist home definitions that we're changing, right? And some
It's the
other ones.
definition section and then the change to the MUR district.
Thank you.
It's late.
I think I got it this time. I got it this time. You ready?
Okay.
Okay.
Third time's a charm, or you
I
strike
hope
out,
so.
sir.
That's right. An ordinance of the city of Sandpoint, a municipal corporation of the state of Idaho, amending certain sections of Title IX Sandpoint zoning ordinance, to wit, chapter 1, section 3, definitions, to modify, add, or delete certain definitions. And chapter 2, section 2-2, to delete an allowed land use, providing for repeal and severability, and providing for publication and effective date. Thank you.
I thought we were going to hand off to Kate there for a minute.
I would entertain a motion that the ordinance pass its first reading by title only and the summary is approved.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Sparrow,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Welker.
Yes.
The ordinance has passed its first reading by title only and the summary is approved. I entertain a motion that the rules requiring 3 separate readings once in the ordinance's entirety be suspended and the ordinance pass its second and third reading under suspension of the rules. Is there a motion?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor Welker,
Yes.
Counselor Sparrow.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, could I get the motion on that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear exactly who that was. Who made the
Who
motion?
made the
I
motion?
believe it was Andy.
Sure. Yes.
Second. There you go.
I need Deb second.
Okay. The motion passed and this ordinance is considered read, passed, and adopted under suspension of the rules. I want to thank all the members of the public who participated in the public hearings this evening. We do still have a little bit more business here. We have announcements, public forum, and consent calendar. And here we go. Put on your seatbelts. Are there any general announcements?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I would like to wish my youngest son a happy 16th birthday on the 16th of March that we already celebrated, so you guys don't have to feel too bad that I'm here. He's bowling right now.
Anyone else? Staff? No? Okay. I have 2 proclamations to read this evening. The first is for the week of the young child. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Is there anyone here to receive this? Okay. Whereas the Idaho Association for the Education of Young Children is celebrating the Week of the Young Child, April 2 through 8, 2022. Whereas the AEYC, educators and others who care for young children in our state are working to promote and inspire high-quality early childhood experiences for our state's youngest citizens, which can provide a foundation of learning and success for children in Sandpoint. Whereas teachers and others who work with or on behalf of young children birth through age 8 make a difference in the lives of young children in Sandpoint and deserve our thanks and recognition. And whereas public policies that support early learning for all young children are crucial to young children's futures and to the prosperity of our society. Now therefore, I, Shelby Ronstadt, Mayor of the City of Sandpoint, Idaho, do hereby proclaim April 2nd through 8th, 2022 as the Week of the Young Child in Sandpoint, and encourage all citizens to work to support and invest in early childhood in our community. This is an Arbor Day proclamation for 2022. Bring life to your community. Whereas in 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees. And whereas the holiday called Arbor Day was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska. And whereas Arbor Day is now observed throughout the nation and the world. And whereas trees can reduce the erosion of our precious topsoil by wind, water, and lower our heating and cooling costs, moderate the temperature, clean the air, produce oxygen, and provide habitat for wildlife. And whereas trees are a renewable resource, giving up paper, wood for our homes, fuel for our fires, and countless other wood products. And whereas trees in our city increase property values, enhance the economic vitality of business areas, and beautify our community. And whereas trees, wherever they are planted, are a source of joy and spiritual renewal. Now therefore, I, Shelby Ronstadt, Mayor of the City of Sandpoint, Idaho, do hereby proclaim Saturday, May 7th, 2022 as Arbor Day in Sandpoint, and I urge all citizens to celebrate Arbor Day and to support efforts to protect our trees and woodlands. And further, I urge all citizens to plant and care for trees to gladden the heart and promote the well-being of this and future generations. We will now proceed with the public forum portion of the meeting, which allows the public to address the council and myself regarding items listed on the consent calendar or on any topic not listed on the agenda. As with our public hearings, comments shall not be personally derogatory, nor shall they be personally directed at any individual, organization, or business. Public comment opportunities during meetings are for comments only. Please do not direct any questions to council or to staff, and do not approach the dais. Each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes. Madam Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak this evening?
Janine Shepherd did, but I believe she left.
You did.
I think she left, yeah.
That's the only sign up I had, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Let me check on Zoom. I don't see any hands on Zoom.
Okay, that concludes the public forum portion of the meeting this evening. We'll now proceed with the consent calendar. For the record, the total amount of bills is $1,035,444.13, reflecting $311,398.89 for regular payables and $724,045.24 for payroll. Are there any items council wishes to remove from the consent calendar?
No.
Hearing none, I would entertain a motion that the consent calendar be approved.
So moved. Second.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. And I just want to say congratulations that we are completing the final phase 2 of the Memorial Field project. Very exciting. Assuming we pass this. Okay, so this will be a roll call.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor Welker,
Yes.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Sparrow,
Yes.
Counselor Dick.
Yes.
Motion passes and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your participation tonight.